Amygdala Hijack Part 2, The Warning. Taunting the Beast. An auto-narrated audiobook. Copyright 2019 by Cort. Episode 10, Alex G. Peter was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, and wondering where the recent events might lead him and the podcast team. He was not prepared for what had happened thus far, but he felt driven to complete the task at hand, despite the growing unease that things might not turn out well. He recalled the odd circumstances in which he found himself ever since the obelisk crash landed in Saskatchewan. The arrival of the obelisk seemed particularly surreal. Why would an alien race send us a warning of an impending attack by other marauding aliens, he wondered, and if they're coming, when would that be? Would we even have time to recognize it? Would we instead die instantly from their advanced tech? As a science and technology podcaster, he was current on most of the amazing new capabilities that had either recently been integrated into society or were about to be, from human-mammal hybrids to post-humans with expanded mental capacities. Given humanity's accelerated pace of technology advancements in the last few decades, it was clear to him that any marauding species would easily possess innumerable ways to instantly annihilate native beings on a planet. Suggestions that they would want to experiment on humans or care to allow people to reside on the planet with them, even as zoo animals or slaves, were preposterous. So why worry about it, he thought. Everyone is stressing out over something they can do very little about. By some strange providence, however, the increasing global frenzy appears to be helping our podcast ratings. The podcast had started out innocently enough, focusing attention on the hard science behind the discoveries. Their recent move to the new format, one that delved into the applications of tech and effects on humans and the planet, still seemed misaligned with Peter's original intentions. Prior to the format change, which fortunately coincided with the obelisk's arrival, his weekly show was on the wane. Advertisers were threatening to pull out, and listener and download numbers were in slow decline. He had previously hoped that simply running the show from his hometown of Cambridge would keep interest high, especially given the proximity to great research universities like Harvard and MIT, the bevy of inquisitive students, and an ample selection of qualified guests. Given the recent widespread use of AI, nanotech, genetic engineering, and aging reversal techniques, public attention was turning rapidly toward applications of science and tech versus the underlying hard sciences. Indeed, it was appearing to him that, like his podcast, basic science discoveries were also on the wane, almost suggesting that humans were reaching a limit. Peter thought about the show's guests since the format change. The welcomer, he considered, was a great guy with an undeniable message of realism and acceptance. We could either greet the stellar marauders and acquiesce to their arrival and life on the planet, or not. To do the latter would mean certain death to all humans, but at least the former gave us a chance for some of our species to survive. Then there was Poison Paul, who offered the flip side of the welcomer's more hopeful approach. His plan was to poison the world with nuclear waste, such that restitution by any marauders would be difficult at best. To Peter, this seemed a rather rational concept that was hard to argue against. No marauders would want a planet bathed in nuclear waste from hundreds of thousands of localized, simultaneous warhead explosions. Not even a futuristic race of alien robots could do much with that degree of devastation. The mere existence of such weapons and readiness to use them could serve as a fair deterrent to invasion. The interview that left him cold and uncomfortable, however, was the most recent one with Eugenie Driver. Maybe it was her upper-crust Boston accent or the attention she paid to her spoiled dog. Perhaps it was that Molly got kidnapped, the same night as the interview. Or it was the audacity of Eugenie's suggestion that our technology should be allowed to run amok to see what future post-humans might evolve coincident with advanced defensive capabilities. In retrospect, Peter felt she was almost using the obelisk and impending alien invasion to advance a position she no doubt held well before its arrival. Advocating an unfettered, Darwinian approach toward a transhuman, post-human future seemed equally as risky as not preparing at all. The antithesis of her suggestion was what had been occurring thus far: the gradual integration of gene editing, robotic, anti-aging, and AI tech into the diverse and expanding biome of humanity via a well-intentioned but weak global regulatory and oversight structure. And what a hybridization of humanity it has become, he pondered. A traveling circus show brought to you by readily available, reasonably cheap, and often dangerous street tech. Every freaking idiot is an inventor these days. The continuous stream of discoveries in these new technologies were being readily commercialized, given the instantaneous, incessant demand for anticipated outcomes and winner-take-all riches for many first-to-market providers. For those who could afford the going rate, vials of designer hybridized, made-to-order DNA could be drop-shipped to homes in injectable or rub-on form. Want larger biceps? Try this. Green eyes? Try that. A few more ears like my friend? How about a clone of yourself, or a set of cat claws instead of toes? Even Peter, the whiz at tech, was having a hard time keeping up with the array of hybridization options. Using the new scroll and rub-on technologies, it was now fairly simple to modify human or animal genetic code and integrate these changes quickly into one's own DNA or, heaven forbid, onto an unsuspecting stranger. The tech was so simple to use and accessible, just about any adept fifth grader could create their own concoction. But this democratization of advanced tech was exacting a high price. The gene drive, or GEDI community was becoming increasingly differentiated from the non-GEDI humans who maintained control over most aspects of society, government, and business. Bias against hybrids was on the rise, and multiple religious and extremist groups, as might be anticipated, were leveraging this perceived bastardization of what was once considered as normal evolution to foment hatred and fear. Indeed, Peter considered, fear of change is forcing the grippers and mechs to react radically. To do things like kidnap Molly. Molly's incident was an example of the growing unrest in the broad GEDI community, but particularly for the grippers, those individuals who integrated robotic and metallic components into their musculoskeletal infrastructures. The mechs were at the hairy edge of the grippers, generally embedding substantial metallics within their bodies and increasingly hybridizing their mental capacities with chipper-centric AI linkages. Thanks to her martial arts skills, Molly skirted certain death while at the same time taking out the mech who kidnapped her. The Boston and Cambridge police took the case, but it was just one more jelly bean in the expanding jar of unrest, angst, and anger that was escalating online and in the streets of major cities around the world. I'm hoping our future podcast guests can help this situation and mitigate concerns, he fretted. The last thing I want to do is taunt an apocalypse by exacerbating the animosities exposed by this damn obelisk. This damn, lovely, fortunate obelisk. 5 minutes to launch. Ears hollered from his upstairs bedroom. He despised cold weather and was dreading the oncoming season. One benefit of wearing layers of clothing during the long winter was that it obscured the bulges from his ears, helping him appear as a non-variant. It wasn't that he minded too much when people took notice, since his was a relatively modest augmentation in an increasingly obvious, highly differentiated population of variants. The downside of wearing so much clothing, however, was that he could not hear as well. In a restaurant, he could normally listen to and process a variety of conversations at other tables. Not so when he was donning a thick winter coat or heavy shirt. He peeked at the mirror. Freckles, he thought. Will I still have these when I'm 50? 60? Flipping his light jacket collar up to cover the ears on his neck, he walked into the kitchen and found Peter affixed to the vidscreen. He was checking out a close-up image of the obelisk on an enhanced 3D capability the screen provided. Shish, Peter hissed. Good stuff. A reporter on the feed continued with the description. Astrophysicists and scientists agree there is no known correlation between the obelisk and the suspected Dyson sphere, which remains a hot item for viewing. People are flocking into public observatories around the world to get a live glimpse. A camera zoomed in to the obelisk's glyphs. Experts from across the globe have conceded almost unanimously that the glyphs are a pictograph of one species, represented by these images here, being dominated or overcome by other beings, as represented here. The image showed numerous small objects hovering just above a planet's surface. This series of sequential square blocks indicates an invasion by nanites or nanobots. In addition to these updated interpretations, other investigations released today confirm it is virtually impossible with our current technology to create such refined images in metal. In contrast, however, a small number of images are less exact and appear almost hand-scribed by the sculptors of the obelisk. The news anchor asked, "Is there any additional information we have discovered?" Although the analysis continues, sources suggest we'll deduce little more regarding its origins or the meaning of the glyphs. To reiterate, experts say it is nearly impossible that this object was conceived or constructed on Earth. They are all but giving absolute certainty that the obelisk was created by beings with technologies much advanced from our own. Peter was finishing his toast and butter. You can't go anywhere in the media today to avoid this obelisk talk. The words media frenzy are not descriptive of the amplitude of tension. It's not just hungry sharks in chummed waters. In this case, the sharks themselves are chumming the waters. And look at my screen. Social media is raking in big bucks on their targeted ads, the classically old psychographic tech crap, to heighten negative emotions. Gaslighting and conspiracy theories running wild. Honestly, I could care less what they know about me in some marketing database, because with the podcast, my full Monty is exposed for everyone to see. You're not that interesting, Ears teased, and I wouldn't waste my time on targeting you since you never buy anything new. Reminds me though. I checked the numbers on streams and downloads. We're above 300,000 and climbing fast to the next tick mark. Peter shook his head in disbelief. I'm not getting this. How can a mostly local, insignificant science podcast garner so much attention? Ears patted his chest. Don't look at me. I'm just the guy spinning the direct marketing machine, creating the content, and morphing the format. Unfortunately for us today, I'm also the stand-in technical guy for Molly. Ears slapped his cheek. God, I forgot to tell you. I spoke with her last night. She's coming home from the hospital. I know that. Spoke with her as well. But she and I talked after you both did. Bet you don't know that she's coming to live with us. Peter dropped his half-eaten toast onto the table, and it tumbled to the floor, face down. Crap, he barked. What? You don't want her here. Peter picked up the toast and stood to find a wet rag. No. I said that because I dropped my toast. When was this decided? Aha. You're not big on the idea, are you? Before you speak, the invite involuntarily emerged from my lips last night. I implored her not to go back to her house, even with the cops and her kung fu protectors, as she calls them. It appears she was already convinced because she didn't argue, which is very unlike her. This ugly episode has upset what is likely the most unupsettable person on earth. You can understand why, since it's not every day you get kidnapped and de-throat your captor. Yeah. God, I wish the cops had better leads. This guy's connections to radical mech groups don't seem that strong, and I can't find any reason the grippers would want a piece of her or me. We're no big fish in the scheme of big ponds. We may have been no big fish a few weeks ago, but that's not quite true now that we're closing in on 500,000 listeners, Ears contended. I'm hoping her captor was just a bored pervo streaming the same podcast over and over, Peter offered. Then his eyes grew wide. Wait a second. Wait a second. We're in a 2-bedroom condo. How do we make this work? Ears smiled slyly. You and Molly can sleep in the same bed. Conversely, she could sleep with me as long as she's very quiet. Oh, I don't think her boyfriend will be great with either idea. You know my sofa? Are you aware it's also a sleeper? Ears queried. Seriously? You'll make Molly sleep on the couch with her broken ribs and all? No. Ears tilted his head. You'll make her sleep on the couch. Or not. Either way, I'm not surrendering my bedroom upstairs. It's the warmest place in winter and my secret enclave. I love Molly, of course, but I love my mattress just as much. Peter grabbed his own collar, as if someone had him in a helpless chokehold. Okay? This should be an interesting experiment. You'll want me out of here soon enough anyway. Ears smacked his lips. Nope. We should do our best to protect each other in these bizarre times. 3 amigos. Radical crap is stirring up everywhere in this town, much less elsewhere in the metro. Farmville, Nebraska may be okay, but it's scarier in Beantown. This is the safest part of Cambridge, and I prefer to be here if things get worse. Too many people are reacting to these instigating news feeds with bad intent, and the news you were just watching, this scientific confirmation of aliens attacking other aliens, reduces the speculation that a variant created the obelisk. Reminds me of a market crash, Peter mused. When it starts to spin out of control, everything goes with it. Cascade upon cascade, and you hope to glue the pieces back together in the end. Ears motioned to the door. Let's go. Perhaps Alex G will mix the magic potion for us with his plea for help. Oh, and speaking of market crashes, I pegged a couple bankers to discuss how they are capitalizing on this new dynamic. Seriously? Like an investment podcast? We need to view this obelisk event from every angle. These folks are not shysters, mind you. They are very legit and making money off the latest fear-mongering. They'll round things out. Peter immediately thought back to his Augie contact. Did you catch Jennifer yet and ask her to appear on the show? I suspect this one's more about the girl than the content, if you ask me. She fits better with our older format, but I placed her on the schedule to accommodate your passions. Peter opened the door for Ears and grinned. Thanks, bud. After driving a short distance from his house, Peter parked his rental in the underground lot at the Cambridge Library east of campus. You told this guy we reserved a room, right? Can we really do the interview in a library setting like this? Ears shook his head in feigned disgust. I am competent, my friend. Remember, you're only the talent, and I use that term very loosely. It's a silent study room, to be honest. They said we could use it for an interview, as long as we didn't get too boisterous. The two walked up the granite library stairs and entered the room where their guest was ready to greet them. He was a stocky man in his mid-50s, with closely shaved hair on a balding head. Peter was instantly comfortable with him. He knew they shared the same problem of male hair loss. This intractable problem still remained largely unresolved by genetic tech, despite advances in most other areas of human physiology. They began the conversation. "Alex, we were watching the news before this interview. It confirmed what most anticipated. The obelisk is apparently not of this earth, and one alien race attacked the other. We are speaking to you today as a radio astronomy communications expert. Can you describe for our audience how that technology works before you explain how it relates to our current challenges?" Alex spent the next 10 minutes discussing radio astronomy and how it might be used in interstellar communications. At the end of his detailed explanation, Peter suspected he had to lighten up the conversation to make it more comprehensible to his growing base of listeners, whom he felt understood less about science than his longtime listeners. He continued questioning. "Is it true that various known technologies could be used to proactively communicate with other sentient species across the galaxy?" "Or even farther," Alex interjected. "Okay, then add intergalactic to that as well. But why this podcast? What unique resolution to the obelisk challenges are you proposing?" "The Dyson sphere is just one more proof, solid, irrevocable proof, that we are not alone in this universe. The obelisk is clearly another." "Yes, there was at least one other and maybe two other species before the one got, wasted," Peter shuddered. "Indeed," he agreed. "What led humankind to conclude that we humans were unique? Was it our need for dogmatic religious control in the early days, or just an innate egotism?" Peter wanted to avoid repeating arguments from the earlier podcast. "Did you catch our show with the welcomer, our reverend friend?" "Yes, in fact it's what compelled me to confirm this appearance with you. If I recall correctly, your other guest, the poison gent, mentioned something about humans unwittingly broadcasting radio waves and other obvious indications of life on Earth. He talked about a disco ball." "Poison Paul." Yes, that one. There's a flip side to his suggestion that was not offered, however. We've been so ethnocentrically inclined that we failed to expand our perspectives on the methods by which other sentient beings might communicate, or if they even need to at all. In fact, if we could extract ethnocentrism from the fiber of our beings and accept that we are not gifted by God to be the shining star in the ocean sands of stars, then we might have taken a different approach. "In what respect?" Peter queried. He then stopped, annoyed by noise emanating from the next room. "Wait a second, please," Peter requested. "Hey ears, can you get up and throw a mean glance at the characters next door? Tell them to temper their partying enthusiasm so the noise isn't captured on our recorder." Ears was reluctant to do this, knowing he could easily edit out the noise. He left the room to tell them anyway, then quickly returned. "Let me start that over. What kind of different approach?" The man shifted uncomfortably in his chair and pulled his bunched pant legs down. "The different approach, assuming you don't believe you're king of the hill, but only a tiny ant in a universe full of hills, is to avoid detection." But that was some of Poison Paul's argument, if I recall. How is this adding a new perspective? Poison Paul suggested we were foolish to amplify our presence on Earth. I'm suggesting that countless other sentient species across the universe are not so ethnocentric and are far more thoughtful and cautious than us. In other words, we humans are out on that fifth standard deviation of stupidity. Good old human hubris. Side-splitting presumptuousness. One could conclude this easily from our lack of success in discovering decisive radio transmissions of other alien cultures. I'm still not getting your point, Peter argued. We can't let our ignorant bravado shield us from what many other, less self-centered creatures are likely doing. Since the early days of research on this topic, we determined aliens were not out there, because we didn't hear from them when using our presumed mode of communications, which was believed to be radio astronomy almost exclusively. If we'd stay calm for a second, and if we do the math properly now, we would surmise that our projections for intelligent life, the Drake equation if you will, fall many magnitudes short of reality. Okay, Peter concurred, I get that. But we're running a little tight on time, and I'm still not clear on what you're proposing. How does it help our situation if the Drake equation math has substantially shortchanged the number of sentient beings and societies out there? Everything matters on this topic. Let's say this obelisk came from your average nasty invader, an average distance away from our solar system or galaxy. You might also suppose that for every nasty invader, there are one or two who are not so nasty. I'm talking the type who are not marauders or enslavers or scours of a planet's surface for God knows what purpose. In other words, assume the universe has many friendlies out there, whatever the mix, but friendlies that might help us in a predicament. Okay, now we're getting to the point. Peter was relieved the man had finally concluded after taking the long path. How do you propose these nice aliens will discover us? Do we send out a calling card to the Vulcans? Peter joked, referring the old television series. Exactly. We must presume we are within a stone's throw of this unfriendly species. This implies they're so close to us that time, space, and every other obstacle this obelisk encountered in its travels were not restrictive enough to prevent it from arriving here. The next thing we should prepare for is a visit from them, a not-so-pleasant one. Yet, how do we know these marauders are the closest aliens to us? How do we know there is no help closer by? Help from a species we could befriend? Such a friendship might cause us to be less concerned about an ugly end to humanity at the hands of the more volatile, obelisk types. Peter bit his lip. Yeah, but how do we discern they aren't just another unfriendly who would be happy to take a closer peek at our little blue dot? We don't, he admitted. You call me Alex G., referencing the inventor of the telephone. We need our Watson come-here moment. We need to throw the dice to locate a friendly face, since we sure as hell understand the alternative has a few serious negativities. It's our crapshoot. I'm there with you. But it's risky. Huge risk. That's life and always has been. Inherent risk. But we'll do our best to send the right message on the right calling card. In other words, we can issue a plea to presumed friends we don't know, hoping they'll understand us. Think of Churchill pleading to Roosevelt and the American people in 1940. It's a call, yes, a distress call. But at least those two guys knew each other beforehand. Well, life isn't always that predictable. But you know what? If we humans were lucky enough to receive one of these little platinum gold statues, then it's highly likely we are not unique in that respect. We should assume many other worlds received that same warning. Now, do we go back to our homes, paint our doors with the blood of slaughtered spring lambs, and hope to be passed over by the more abominable fellas from above? I suppose that worked once in our history, and it might work again. Personally, I prefer not to take that gamble. Our best alternative is to scream very loudly at anyone within earshot and tell them we're peaceful, friendly, and in need of some assistance. Ears and Peter agreed that this was a great ending, so they wrapped up the interview with Alex G., left the library, and drove back home. Ears was so excited about getting this interview on the web that he started to immediately edit the recording. A few hours later, he got the call from Molly that she was on her way over to her new temporary living quarters. "Jesus," Peter complained, "I hardly had time to get my stuff out of the room." "You can always go back to your house," Ears joked. Of course, the car rental agency probably won't appreciate seeing their vehicle in flames in your driveway. Plus, your insurance company may need to replace other parts of your house, assuming the crazies only mess with the dwelling structure and not you. Peter rolled his eyes and consented. "You're right. Let the investigations take their course. Besides, living here, avoiding cell phone usage, and having the three of us together for a while is not all that bad, I suppose. Glad to see you're coming around. I changed the sheets on the couch fold-out, so you'll be fine there, and I'll be quiet in the morning when I get up. I can do most of my work in the bedroom office upstairs and let you get the beauty rest you require." They walked out to help Molly bring her bags up. Episode 11, Bioethyl. The following week was far less eventful for the trio. Molly settled into the new digs, and Peter slept uncomfortably on the couch, often with his bony toes extending beyond the edge of the mattress. It wasn't that he was tall at 5'9", it's just that the mattress was short. He missed his house and its proximity to Harvard Square. Ears' location was 3 miles to the northwest, but the neighborhood changed enough to have a totally different feel. Sunday arrived quickly, and Bioethyl phoned that she needed to meet them immediately, given a change in her schedule. This caused them to scrap their individual plans for the day and make immediate arrangements to interview her at a place she frequented, a combo coffee shop and bank near the square. Peter was fine with this since it was his old neighborhood, and he knew the place well. Bioethyl was young, almost too young for an esteemed researcher and educator. She looked so vital and youthful that Peter assumed she had been using anti-aging tech for some time. Such chemicals and drugs were becoming commonplace prescriptions, with many of them shifting to over-the-counter. He personally cared less about aging and much more about his thinning hair, telling himself he could wait to take any drugs until that problem was resolved by the pharmaceutical industry. Bioethyl flipped her long red hair back constantly behind her ears, and it kept slipping back in front of her face. This agitated Peter somewhat from the start. "Why don't you pin or tie it back? Isn't that what women do?" he wondered. The four began the conversation in a compact private conference room at the rear of the coffee shop. It was dimly lit for laptop viewing, but was distant enough from the serving area to avoid the buzzing cappuccino machines and customer noise. "Now that your background has been covered to the extent possible, will you give us your take on the obelisk and its relevance to what you do?" Peter requested. Bioethyl sipped her coffee. "It's not so much the obelisk. Much of this thinking predates the obelisk by years." "Thinking by whom?" "By people like the woman you had on earlier. Eugenie Driver. No intention to one-up her, but that point of view might be shaped by her background and, who knows, by her own political or financial interests. I obviously don't have a clue who she was, but most humans are excessively driven by ulterior motives to advantage themselves." "Are you implying that you have no such motives?" "I'm saying that as a scientist and an ethicist, it's my job to analyze and speak to the long-term implications of our actions. My perspectives are affected nominally by the obelisk or threat of an invasion. I am speaking with you today to suggest the unsuggestible." Peter clicked his tongue at the mention. It's an odd world we're in, Ethel, and these latest decades and last few weeks attest to that. I'm personally hard-pressed to find anything unsuggestible because by now, I think I've seen everything. Perhaps so, and this may not be new to you, the science podcast guru, she teased. Yet, it is new to many. Discussions are happening everywhere. Backrooms, behind closed doors, and in the hallowed halls of government and think tanks. Our listeners are eager to learn, so have at it. She spread her hands out on the beige formica table. This confirmation of the existence of aliens, superior beings, has finally put us humans in our place. We are minor beings on a minor planet, and we've had our run. It could be that the dead end we are treading down is the common finality for most sentient societies, and we're experiencing a typical endgame for a species like ours. This may be a great filter we just won't get past. After we've had our day in the sun, another species comes along, effectively lands here, and replaces us on this same planet. You see this often in nature, and I can give you 100 examples. Think of the snake that uses the rabbit's hole for a home after digesting the previous occupants. Consider the ants that raid the termite nest and feast on them, then reuse the mound. I could go on and on. Peter looked vexed. Are you saying we should not fight? That we should simply roll over and accept that these marauders are superior, that we are inferior, and then give up the proverbial ghost? That doesn't seem like fun. It implies, everyone come drink from the poison cup, because the end has arrived. No, she pleaded. Don't take this wrong. It's not how we fight or what we fight with. It's more about recognizing and accepting that humans are one species that lived here, on this planet, for a period of time. Then others did. Later, perhaps others and others. Nothing is permanent in time, right? She could see Peter was not quite understanding. I'll put it another way. Okay? It's not like we're serious inhabitants here, right? Not serious. What do you mean? He interjected. I'll refrain from swearing, however much I'd prefer to. We humans are not serious inhabitants. We used and abused the planet's resources, especially each other, and that problem is getting worse as anti-aging and genetics tech prolong our lives. Have we made even a single notable stride to move forward in a common direction, to make a lasting, disciplined plan for how we'll survive as a species over the long term? Through the millennia? Peter shook his head. I guess not. Humans are not wired that way. But how does this thinking fit into the scope of science and tech? There's a crash course coming for humanity, Peter, whether aliens do or don't arrive. It's just beyond our horizon. We had predictions of this in the past by many visionaries, but now too many levers are jamming the system. The levers of the past usually counterbalanced each other. Good laws offset bad. Positive ethics offset bad. Charity and solace mitigated greed and torment. However, the laws of nature eventually point to one of the sides tipping the scale so much that the other side can't obtain enough weight to right the balance again. And given Murphy's law of that which can go wrong will go wrong, every negative lever will eventually happen at once, figuratively impaling our species in one single simultaneous moment. I think I'm with you, but I don't understand what you're advocating. Is it that we should give in to aliens, create a long-term plan for ourselves, or eliminate these levers? No, she responded vehemently. Those options are unrealistic. Will we fight? Yes, assuming we even get the chance. It's an outright laugh to see how many people are on the streets with weapons. Against alien tech, are you kidding me? Get a grip. And with a long-term plan, can we seriously believe humans will garner the courage to pull it together long enough to develop, much less achieve, even a single solitary objective? We've proven that to be impossible, time and again. Our lack of foresight is in our very nature, in the DNA of humanity. What of the levers you mentioned? If we were 500 humans on the planet, it might be a different story. We might agree on one goal. But there are nearly 9 billion now, and every individual allows themselves to be controlled by a different set of levers, commonly called narratives anymore. Distortions are built into all we do and everything we are. For example, let's propose we disengage the global levers of our grotesque wealth imbalances. In other words, let's no longer provide levers of advantage to the rich and levers of disadvantage to the poor. So assume the rich are fine with this. Can you imagine that world? It's a dreamscape. No AR or VR headset and no mech contraption will airlift you into that world. It only exists in the dreams of a gaming programmer. Peter was frustrated that this interview was not concluding with a solid perspective. Then what do you suggest we do? Is it to keep on keeping on? Exactly that. I say to go run your social simulations, your variations on outcomes, and make sure the input variables are realistic. None of them points to a long-term solution, and anyone with dos cojones or ovarios to be realistic enough will come to the same conclusion. I'm not sure every listener will understand the Spanish references, he laughed. She ignored him. Look, the train of humanity is going full steam towards a tunnel, but the tunnel was never built. We never had the guts to build a tunnel of any sort to get out of our own messes, and we never will. My only pinprick of hope, she paused for a moment to take a breath, is that some form of variant will create a magic carpet for all of us to ride over the mountain to the tracks on the other side. But then that's crack smoke. I'm just saying. All three were dumbfounded by her parade of words and energetic cynicism, but Peter had to close. Bioethyl, this is a different take on things, and not a particularly hopeful one. Realistic, she warned. Yes, it's probably too much realism for some listeners. But hey, if you need a slap in face sometime, somebody's got to give it to you. We just hope it's not the aliens. Thanks for visiting with us today. Wait, she insisted. Not finished yet. I don't sense we captured the gist of what I intended to leave your listeners with. Yes, humanity is a hopeless mess, and we are heading right into the perfect storm, a storm that will assuredly bring our time on this planet to an end. As I indicated, the only hope I have is that a variant will create a path to keep the species alive in some form. This may not be a clipper like the lady suggested, but a chipper or gripper or full mech, or even a pure AI-based sentient intelligence, or any derivation thereof. I might have believed at one time that it could be unaltered humans, but I don't expect humanity to come out on top of those others, not by a long reach. It could just as well be something we create or is self-created, such as sentient, self-replicating AI. Peter was surprised at her suggestion. But isn't this similar to what Eugenie Driver indicated, that we should let nature and technology take its course, allowing the rise of a superior variant while others have a lesser status in society, or worse yet, are eliminated? She grabbed her purse and sweater. Of course not. I'm talking about evolution over time for variations on humanity and its creations. Enough resources exist on this planet to go around for every variation on the theme, assuming we exercise discipline. I mean that to include sentient, non-protoplasmic variants as well, which is on the near horizon as sentient AI. Few will concede this fact, particularly the religious types, but AI sentience is here today in some forms if we'd only admit it to ourselves by taking the brakes off the engines. Peter did not want to proceed into the thorny topic of sentient AI, not in this conversation. In summary, you're suggesting humanity's duration may be on the wane, and that may include being annihilated by alien marauders. Maybe humans even might take a subordinate position to one or more variants. Is that correct? Closer, she said. Did we really think we could sustain the simplistic, fear-based, emotionally overwrought characteristics of humanity in the face of the rational and logic-based systems we created in science and math? Such a belief is indefensible. Did we think we could take the best or worst of what humanity offers, amplify and encode it, and not eventually be overcome by it? We remain today as humans have always been, simpletons, driven by irrationality, short-sightedness, fear, self-absorption, and entitlement, with rare moments of social insight and progress. At this late stage of our decline, we flail mercilessly in a boiling cauldron of unhinged technology, unaware of the need to create a recipe for long-term, sustained viability. Peter was dumbfounded by the frankness of her conclusion. Okay then. We'll need to wrap it up on that last comment. Thanks again for your time and insights. After the interview, the three exited to the parking garage. Peter noticed Molly's friendly guards were missing. Where are your cop and martial arts friends? I thought they were following us. Molly was pensive. I told them we'd be driving out of the garage and to meet us at the top. Episode 12, Control Freak. Ears. A voice shouted from behind. Ears turned around, assuming it was one of his variant friends. Molly was jolted at the noise. Despite her damage-taped ribs, she crouched in a pose ready to strike. The woman calling to them spread both hands outward in a gesture of friendship. I'm not here to scare you. We understand what y'all are going through, she expressed with a refined southern accent, and we're clear on what you're capable of. She glanced intentionally at Molly. Who are you? Molly demanded, not relaxing. Your next interview, Molly. You call him Control Freak. He's that to a degree. But the man's my boss, and he needs to get this message to you now. I hate to interrupt your plans today, but it'd be awfully generous if y'all could come with us to an undisclosed location. Hold it. What's your name? Ears asked. Polly Ears. We spoke on the phone. She held out her mobile and began to play a recording of one of their calls together. Molly was extremely uncomfortable at this unexpected change. She scoped the surroundings and noticed a large black SUV near the exit. Hey, she shouted, using her best command voice, my people are up there. Cops and friends. They're waiting for us. We can do this on a prearranged basis. Not here. Dressed in a fine gray business suit like a mannequin in a Park Avenue shop, Polly folded her hands across her chest and grinned. Your control freak is a very important person, connected to people who pull big strings. We cleared doing this with the Cambridge PD, a command from on high. Molly, we're familiar with your friends up there and appreciate their purpose, but we'd prefer they not join us. If you insist, they can follow, but my boss wants to avoid any unnecessary disclosures of his location. Other forces are at play, so we must be careful. He's prepared to reward y'all, simply to get the chance to speak with you. We're thinking $1 million, if that sounds right. The three were stunned. Did I hear that right? 1/3 of $1 million apiece. Holy cripes! Ears exclaimed. Each, she confirmed, for your troubles. To my boss, money is the least of our concerns right now. Molly felt weak in the knees. What of my friends up top? It'd be great if you could go speak with them. Here. Take this. Polly reached into her purse, which had been hidden from view, and extracted 2 thick folios. 500, Polly noted. 500 bucks? Molly asked, her eyebrows raised. 500 hundreds. 50,000 each. We'll need you for less than 3 hours. You must convince them, however, to stay clear. Molly placed her arms around her friends. She was shaking. Why money? The oldest cure in the book, my boss says. He's a Texan, so that's how he speaks, often in terms of money. Now, I don't want to pressure y'all. Polly turned her head to carefully watch 2 people exit from the elevators and walk to their respective cars. He has his own reasons to get the interview done today and prefers that you hold off on your plans to run this week's show with bioethyl. If possible, he'd like to be next on your podcast, as time is of the essence. Peter's head was swimming at the idea of $1 million in the bank. We'd be doing this interview anyway in a few days, he acknowledged to his team. I don't see a problem with advancing it, and you can't argue with the incentive guys. What do you say? Peter had already sized up the risk in what she was saying, taking comfort in thinking that she and Molly could have been sisters in another life. Long dark hair. Pleasing natural smile. Proud stance. Molly was taking a more critical read, however. I'll play along with it, but let's review the facts. You followed us here. Right. You know where we're going next. Right. You pulled strings to remove our protection. I know those guys personally, by the way. And my boss knows their heads of state and then some. Molly sighed. So what's next? Come with us. It's faster and easier that way. You're aware of what just happened to me? Molly inquired, placing her hand over her ribcage. Yes. We're sorry to hear about that. My boss is old school. He hates it when any woman is subjected to violence. He despises the media for its continued misogynistic portrayals and perennial glorification of violence against women. And don't get him started on their aberrant management teams, grotesque incentives, and do-nothing boards of directors. He's not a fan of violence or anarchy or even control, which brings up the question as to why you call him control freak. It wasn't him as the control freak, but it was what he was suggesting about others, Ears interjected. Polly looked to see if anyone was within earshot and lowered her voice. That's a conversation you can have with my boss. I assume y'all will find it enlightening and, in this case, enriching. Here, log into your bank accounts if you'd like. You'll find the funds are already credited. Ears grabbed her phone and logged into his bank account. His eyes grew wide. I had like 20,000 there yesterday, and now I see nearly $1.5 million. What? Oh, sorry, she giggled. He wanted to gross y'all up for taxes. It should come out to a clean $1 million after tax. Polly held her hands outward and made a gesture as if she were rubbing a basketball. 3 hours. $1 million smackers apiece. Sounds like a decent afternoon, in my opinion. Molly closed her eyes and rubbed the back of her neck. She put her other hand in front of her for the folios. I'll talk with my buds up there. They won't like it, but they trust me and will do as I say. I'll tell them to have a few beers with the money, but I'm guessing they won't. They'll go back to the studio and work off their anxieties. Which reminds me. After I inform them, I'll need to speak with my master to acknowledge that I approved of this. That's covered already. Your master would accept no money, but we knew people in common. Very well connected within interesting circles. Did you know that? Suggested you should act on your instincts. Christ, Molly grumbled, you folks have this figured out. Yes, my master is a great human being. And yes, I still need to call before we step in your vehicle. You want to go with them or drive ourselves? Safer to drive, Peter suggested, looking at Molly for a signal. Molly nodded. I'm in my space, Peter, evaluating the moment. I'll tell my friends what she told me, that our master is okay with this. Then I'll call to confirm, completing the circle. Let's consider the bright side. We get a week off after this with no interviews. Besides, we need the rest, or at least I need the rest. Let's do this. Polly slipped the 2 folios into her hand, and Molly turned to walk up the exit ramp. We're journalists of sorts, and journalists have to take occasional risks, fellas. As they approached the meeting location, Polly asked them to lower their eyes and avoid glancing out the SUV's windows, which were effectively opaque. The 3 obliged, and sensed they were dropping into a long underground driveway. A tunnel, Ears whispered. Polly responded, your mind can fool you, Ears. We'll face an elevator when we exit, and I'd appreciate it if you can keep your eyes forward. As I indicated a few minutes ago, your control freak has good reasons to stay incognito. The SUV halted in what appeared to be a long, dark garage, illuminated only by a dim light from the elevator. Watch your step as you exit the vehicle. I'm right behind you. After the elevator doors closed, Molly remembered, my purse. I left it in the SUV. Don't worry, Polly reassured her. That vehicle is going nowhere until we drive you out of here, alive, of course. Y'all are without electronics, correct? The elevator stopped, and Ears spoke. The Sony is in my pocket from our meeting with Bioethyl. Do you mind if I take that for now? How will we record the session? Peter inquired. We prearranged for a quality recording in the room. You'll be at a small table with embedded mics. It's this way, she indicated, holding her hand out for the Sony. Ears obliged, and they walked together down a dark, nondescript hallway. Again, just confirming. No other electronics you're aware of, and none of you are chippers or mechs? We'll pass through a scanner. They entered an anteroom, through a rounded doorway used for metal detection. Ears confirmed that as he walked through. Ears, Polly commented, your belt buckle is Texas-sized. Would you mind removing it and trying again? He handed Polly his belt, then walked through without alerting the system. I like that buckle, she winked. Ears smiled. What a beautiful woman, he thought. She'd never, no, don't even go there. Nobody wants to date a variant with extra ears. Sometimes I wonder where my head was at when I made this choice. Wasn't thinking about mates. They entered a darkened room and sat on 3 comfortable leather chairs that faced a large burnished walnut table. The table appeared to be oval, though half of it was obscured from ceiling to floor by a dark cloth veil. Ears checked out the surroundings. It reminded him of a private executive room beside a CEO's office. No windows, soundproofing everywhere, and so quiet you could hear everyone breathe. He glanced at Peter, who was euphoric. Dude, Ears whispered, don't let that money go to your head. You're doing an interview, so just get the job done. Molly heard his comment and patted Peter on the shoulder, smirking with delight. This is yours, big guy. Peter natural, preternatural. No prep, no questions from your helpers, just raw talent. Slightly nervous without the usual prep, Peter grinned and shrugged. Both you guys are here too. If you have questions, then you should ask. Agreed? She nodded, though Ears appeared more reluctant. He was accustomed to listening and assisting in the podcasts, not being a personality with any voice. They heard a door open and close behind the veil. Ears was attuned to the man's size, judging from the groan his chair made when he sat down. Somewhat heavy-set man, he considered. Cotton clothes and leather boots. His breathing is too fast, a chest breather. Needs an exercise plan. I can sense his hypertension. Polly waved at them as she slipped behind the veil. Pleased to meet you folks, a booming, friendly voice emerged. Sorry about the stealth and not shaking y'all's hands, my amigos, but I prefer to stay incognito, given what I plan on sharing with you. The three responded with hellos, and he continued. Double apologies for reworking your schedules impromptu. I wanted to do this face-to-face instead of over the phone, since you never know who's listening. Which reminds me, if I get loquacious, as I'm known to do, we'll perform editing or cutting before we deliver you the final file. There was a moment of silence, as if he was waiting for a reaction. Ears, Polly tells me we'll deliver the edited version to you by courier tomorrow morning, at your location, if that's acceptable. Ears was freaked by the mystery. Sure, no problem, he replied meekly. Great. It's a special thing to have you three here. I can't say I was an avid listener to your podcast, though I do keep pods running constantly. Works better than canned music or what have you, and I can pick up something I didn't understand before. You'd be surprised, but a guy like me has big things on his mind, so I place that old tablet next to my ear before going to bed to divert my thoughts. My wife's not too fond of the arrangement, but the talking often lulls me to sleep when I'm horizontal. He laughed, as did they. The three were fidgety, casting nervous glances at each other. Polly tells me you had this Poison Paul guy and Eugenie Driver interviews, correct? Right, Peter confirmed. Let's see. Oh, I forgot the Reverend and then Alex G. Now, I listened to that one and found it quite humorous, didn't you? Like, let's broadcast a giant SOS and hope we can recruit an ally in an alien. Yeah, funny in hindsight, Peter chuckled. I believe Polly talked with y'all about putting me on next. I'd appreciate that for multiple reasons which may become apparent, as we can't allow the world to continue down the ornery path it's on. Every single day counts, at least to me and some others, trying to wrangle this delicate situation. Oh, and Polly just checked and wanted me to let you know that your last podcast is over the 1 million mark on streams and downloads. Ears raised his eyebrows and wanted to ask how they knew, but Control Freak continued. You're hitting your stride, kids, more than you realize. If you weren't engaged in this business, I wouldn't mind having you join my team. Any questions before we begin? Peter sat forward. How do you want to proceed with the interview? We didn't have time to develop the usual Q&A, so we may need to wing it. I don't mind that. As I said, we'll edit to work out the kinks. I'm sure you'll be satisfied with the result. So why don't we get going? Great. Are you okay if Molly and Ears engage as well? It'd be a pleasure. Peter continued. Then I'll start first. We'll stream this and play per our regular schedule. To do that, I'll create a brief introduction covering the topic and our conversation background. Then we'll cut into the recorded session. Does that make sense? Yes, it does. Very accustomed to that format. However, please avoid discussing aspects of our meeting, such as the logistical and timing factors encountered today. I prefer that comments on secrecy, like this damn veil between us, your trip here and back and the bank funds, are kept out of the conversation. By the way, can you call me something else? I don't mind the control freak title for this show, I'm fine to use that. But let's try right now doing something that rolls off the tongue easier when talking. How's a good Texas name like stew? Descriptive of the situation we find ourselves in, a chunky, confusing, boiling pot of stew. Certainly, sir, I mean stew. We only called you control freak because there was so little to go on regarding this conversation. Our presumption is that you'll speak about the obelisk, any intentions behind it, and the implications of reactions around the globe. Am I on target? On target, he confirmed. Oh, and by the way, we're very grateful for the money. No problem. It's a convincer, for sure. I might suggest you use at least a tad of that cash to enhance your marketing. In fact, we're actively executing in the background to greatly expand your audience before this interview goes live. We'll help get that message out, which can't hurt your little podcast here. Peter glanced at Molly and Ears, then beamed broadly. Wow, that's unexpected but accepted graciously, sir. We can start right in, so I'll go ahead. He folded his hands on the table to help him focus on the introduction. Stu, you contacted us, as I recall, requesting to discuss insights into the obelisk and what it might mean to us earthbound creatures. We didn't get a robust picture of what it was you cared to share, beyond the idea that what we're hearing could be conspiratorial. Something about how we should put our personal antennas up to distinguish fact from fiction. Is that in line with your thoughts? Sure, son. I'll tell your listeners a few things not generally known, nor widely exposed for a variety of reasons. I assume your podcast started out with folks only interested in the basic sciences. This new format you're using has created a fair pickup in your numbers because it's focusing a tad more on how science might extricate us from this predicament. What I'll be suggesting to you and your listeners may be whispered in the darker corners of the media, which is pretty dark and destructive these days anyway. I'll shine a different light for everyone to see with clarity. Okay? Can you elaborate on your media point? Now that's raccoons in a dumpster, son. Raccoons in a dumpster. I'm not intending to denigrate the entire media. These are often good people, at least many are in these parts. Around the world, though, that same media is often used to stir up nasty goings-on. Condemnable stuff. No different than in the last few decades, social media is mostly being used to get people to do crazy things they wouldn't consider before that dad-blasted statue fell from the sky. And you know what? These media companies and their morally bereft management teams and boards don't care. Not a bit. They don't take responsibility for what they report on, or the crap they embrace or amplify in the name of free speech, fame, and power. They're now in the third decade of throwing cow dung narratives at people via their money-hungry algorithms, and we poor suckers just keep lapping it up like kittens at the milk bowl. Meanwhile, the bastards at the helm wash their soiled hands of any accusations. Worse yet, they're typically run by morons spewing out their selected brand of personal propaganda while putting forth friendly, hyper-concerned public personas. Everything they preach must always be painted in two colors, friend or foe, black hats or white. They're experts at taking advantage of the fact that we humans never learned our history lessons about emotions and propaganda. Never learned. Emotions. Meaning what in this case? Peter wondered. It's the amygdala hijack, son. That's what I call it, anyway. In fact, some professorial type wrote a book about it a few years ago, that your amygdala gets hijacked by offending stimuli and your emotional response explodes way out of proportion. It's this bull-larky stimuli they shovel out constantly to rile us up and get us to buy, whether a product or pseudo-theology. Every time I turn on the screen, Someone just spit in my eye with a mouthful of acidic, masticated chew. We should have comprehended by now that getting upset causes us to open up the gullet and ingest more of that same cow dung. That's the amygdala part of the equation. Amygdala? The flight or fight part? Molly asked. Yes, ma'am. Jacking up that brain part in your skull, making those cells churn out all manner of fear and paranoia from their deviously devised narratives. Then there's the added effect of subtle, uncontrollable addiction. Certainly, your podcast listeners should understand the dynamics of endorphin release when you chomp a bite of media that fits your mindset, or the rage of anger hormones when it doesn't. But the large rest of the world doesn't notice or understand who or what's tugging hard at their proverbial nose rings. You're referring to how those emotions cause people to listen or watch, consume the advertising, then buy the products, right? Molly added. Of course. I'm familiar with many of the people in charge of these perennial crap machines, and they always make the wrong choice between having a fatter wallet today to buy their next mansion or yacht versus ensuring their grandkids live in a decent world tomorrow. The instant and suboptimal far outgun the long-term and optimal. We're not planners or thinkers, kids. It's not the human condition. To this point, the interview was only skimming the surface of their intentions for the revised podcast format, and Peter got the look from Molly to pick up the pace. Sure, Stu, we understand the control aspects of media, irrespective of which side you're on. But that's not new news to any degree. Yes, it's ramped to a fever pitch lately, and just when you believe it can't get any worse, it does. That's been around somewhat since the days of the first ads or the town criers, but it was clearly revved up by social media these last few decades. I can't say it's always harmful, though. Young man, certain people or groups in the world are more cunning than you can perceive. When you combine their power and clandestine strategies and, I'll say it, their evil and corrupt intentions and distorted communications, then you got a real pit of vipers we've fallen into. A deep dark pit with no exit sign and no ladder. Peter was still uncomfortable talking into the veil. He wanted to take a read of the man to get a sense of his body language, which often helped him discern where to take the conversation. Understood, but I'd like to get back to the obelisk and how this conversation ties together. I was waiting for this question, Stu continued. What are the conclusions thus far? Words everyone else has said. Words the government and experts spoke or wrote. We see pictures near and far, electron microscope imaging, alloy testing. Now this testing is being performed with very careful consideration, under lots of watchful eyes, and they're leaking out bits and pieces to the media so they can put their capitalistic and hedonistic spin on it. Beyond this, however, can we be absolutely certain of what we've got? Peter nodded, hoping Stu could see the verbal cue. I don't know. It looks real, and the circumstances around it are compelling. The tantalum hafnium carbide shell is clearly beyond our current tech. There's the evidence of its entry through the atmosphere and the intricacy of the carvings. And gee, it's not an insignificant quantity of gold and platinum, built to perfection. But are we positive this obelisk is from an alien race? Stu queried. It would appear to be the case, at least per the experts, Molly added. Hell, a whole passel of hoaxes have been pulled on humanity over the years. After looking at this object, it's clear to some of us that humans could well have created it with a bit of sweat and effort. If we made the jump to do this, and if we had the financial backing to buy the metal and keep it quiet, we might be 3D printing such objects to satisfy the gold lust of every sultan. What I'm saying is that you shouldn't trust everything you're told in the media. Besides, this one just smells wrong. Peter took him up on the suggestion. Who gains an advantage if this is a hoax? We've experienced the increase in global tensions, fear and anxiety, and anarchy, right? I'm not seeing one person coming out of this unscathed. In a way, Peter, you're both right and wrong in that statement. True, it's not a single person that comes out unscathed. If you conclude that it's a hoax, then the target suspects are many multiples of characters. Where are you leading? Peter inquired. Sounds a bit conspiratorial for this podcast. The obelisk is the perfect foil, son, the perfect foil. Any 2-bit history professor in this town will tell you that the one-way ticket to being controlled is to hand your faith and fear to someone else. To hope and pray that somebody will soon resolve your troubles if you just give them your mind and treasure. I honestly can't imagine a better way to do this. In fact, I'm somewhat perturbed that I didn't conceive of the guise myself. Then I could have gotten the word out beforehand to educate everyone that it might happen, and to avoid the upset. People are inclined to believe anything except their own senses, Molly interjected. Yep. What you see on the streets these days, the anarchy that's bubbling up, we saw that in spades, or at least smaller spades, during those recent corrosive populist times. You pour in a mixture of emotional upset and disenfranchisement, victimhood, grievance, greed, fear, bombast. And I'll double down on the victimhood and grievance bit, since that old narrative works every time on even the coldest hearts to elicit the destructive emotions of vengeance and entitlement. Then you sprinkle in a minority group or country or religion you can poke your sword at to chastise and blame, such as our variant friends, and now you painted yourself a pretty picture for control. This is a well-honed model, with proven success in shredding human decency and progress. It's the poisonous nectar of autocrats and tyrants, whether they veil their rhetoric behind a fascist flag of order and discipline or a socialist flag of righteous outcome for everyone. But one person or country can't be doing this, if it's true. I mean, we don't need to mention the obvious countries, but I can imagine only a few places whose leaders could successfully execute such a hoax, Peter suggested. Son, I assume you understand the term social Darwinism. Sure, he replied, and most listeners should. It's the thought that those who are at the social and economic pinnacle of life have an evolutionary right to be there. And do you know how many trillionaires this world has now, setting aside the billionaires for a moment? Over 300 trillionaires. I lost count of billionaires after 5,000, Molly lamented. She was getting worked up and wanted more participation in the discussion now that it was midstream. Yes, Molly, thank you. I've been around enough of these folks in my day, and I'll tell you this. Nearly all live in different mental landscapes than regular folk. Like all good little rationalizers, the worst of them adopt narratives to advantage themselves exquisitely, meaning to the disadvantage of everyone else. It's always a narrative of anarchy, some way to disrupt the current order and pull the levers. Call it social Darwinism, libertarianism, conservatism, socialism, totalitarianism. Any ism will do the job, as long as it foments enough emotions and grievances to stir the pot into a frenzy. They like stirring the pot. That's where they gain the most power. And one recent addition to that recipe is an event that will shake any regular Joe's foundation to the core, with the obelisk suddenly appearing at this most inopportune moment. Couldn't have been better timing, in fact. Think about it a minute. With their resources, a few of these zealots could easily put their minds and talents together and create an obelisk like this in a jiffy. But to what end? Ears interjected, feeling more anxious the further they proceeded. How do they profit from it? Stu paused for a minute. This is not for profit, big guy. At least not the monetary kind. When you have $1 trillion banked, give or take a few, you've got what you need to suit your lusts for a good long while. I'll give you one possible scenario, okay? Say I'm one of them, and I'm imbued with the sense that I own what I own because, well, hell, I'm innately superior than all others. And let's say if I play my cards right, I can live forever because we're well on the way to completely solving that riddle of nature. Let's also assume I think I not only deserve to live that long, but I have an inbred right to keep everything currently in my possession, and thusly enable that eternal celestial life on earth for which I've positioned myself. How do I ensure that gets done? Obelisk? Peter guessed. Got it. I take advantage of a world inebriated and drugged up on radical changes in the ecosystem of environmental, social, and variant deviations. I use that glowing obelisk orb to stir up the pot, twist the burner to max, and let her explode. You're suggesting just one person or a small group though, right? Molly wondered. Oh no. These people aren't what they are because they're poor planners, Molly. I'm assuming you'd bring others, possibly many others, into your plans. Why? Well, y'all are of the same mind. Consider it this way. The anarchy narrative you tell yourself is that governments and the people in them are inherently corruptible and therefore corrupted. You clearly can't count on them to help you live that golden, effulgent, and eternal life of pleasure and power. Heck, they'll probably stand in your way and smash your luminous plans for godhood. Trust me, I've had run-ins with these eternalist types the last few years, and nothing will stop them from achieving this vision. He likes to call them eternalaires, Polly interjected. Indeed, Stu smiled, the name fits. So, you need to shake those governments out by amplifying the anarchy dial to 11. When the smoke finally clears, you and your compadres take charge. Now you're one of a football team's complement of King Charles social Darwinists scattered globally, pontificating your asses off about how and why everyone needs to serve and worship you in your effulgence. Wizards like you should never be controlled, managed, or monitored in any way by any government. You're among the few, the world's tech and commerce and totalitarian superstars, so you must be superior to everyone else by definition. Forget about what hell you wrought for others while climbing to your pinnacle of power and wealth. Your pinnacle demands that you control all, but have no controls placed upon you. At that moment and from then on, you become a god on earth, kids. A god on earth, and Zeus has nothing on you. Peter was vexed at the audacity of the suggestion and concerned about what this type of conspiracy theorizing would do to his podcast and listeners. Stu, this is hard to accept. Governments would stop this, the NSA, CIA, Interpol, you name it. Don't be too sure. That little platinum gold mudball created quite a disturbance in the normal operations of those anti-anarchy groups. They won't go investigating a phantom conspiracy by the world's trillionaires, who could, excuse the expression, kick their asses to the moon and back if they wanted to. Certainly not while they're fighting the voracious fires of social upheaval in every room of the house. Phew! Peter exclaimed. Like I said, I can't help but imagine conspiracy theories and those discussions of a secret society or deep state. It's not a government state, though. It's a private deep state, you're saying. A few hundred private individuals controlling the world and using fear to scour the path there. Damn righteous, son, couldn't have said it better. It is indeed using fear to burn the path forward, that path to almighty and everlasting wealth, power, glory, and progeny. The deep state is not governmental. It's a private state run by the eternalaires, one in which they control all the puppet strings but have no controls on themselves. Better yet, they'll use their social media and gutless politicians to most effectively and actively point fingers at others, to accuse others of what they themselves are doing. That good offense is always the best defense. Damn good outcome for those lucky souls. Hey, we aren't talking rocket science, social and political theory here, right? Right, Molly mumbled. Lacking better judgment or discernment, we humans are innately inclined to either control or be controlled. Either of those arise from deep cowardice and lack of self-awareness. The last few hundred years should be proof of that. The advantage in today's specific set of conflagrations is that our technology is so refined, so enhanced, that you can readily manufacture the desired outcome if you're persistent, rich, and smart enough. This becomes Big Brother reimagined in a corporate or commercially regal state. Some might call that technocracy. I call it a bunch of wealthy wimps afraid to die and give up what they own, as if they really own anything in their pitiful, tiny mental constructs of self. In the end, however, it's an unnatural state, and unnatural systems always degrade into very ugly outcomes for the species. He paused. I'm sorry to say, but I just got nudged and need to wrap it up. Again, my apologies with the circumstances, but I appreciate you letting me say my piece and allow your listeners to consider my warning, assuming they get my drift. The interview concluded abruptly. They thanked Stu for his time and boarded the SUV home, without Polly this time. At her request, they did not to speak about the interview on the way back to Cambridge. The trio immediately checked their bank accounts when they arrived at Ear's condo and could access their screens once again. Each of them had the same balance credited. I feel conned, Molly confessed, believing this too good to be true, as if we just did a paid promotional. However, if what Stu's suggesting is the case, then what a mess we're in, fellas. Peter's face was pained. I see a message from the Cambridge PD asking to come to the station at our convenience today, and they want both of you. I'm literally fried with all that's happened today. Molly peered at her phone. I see it too. Look, I have a dozen people to call tonight, starting with my kung fu master and that impertinent boyfriend of mine. Can you call and request tomorrow morning? It's close to 5, and whoever wants to speak with us is likely on their way home by now. Impertinent, Ears uttered. Todd sounds more like a child. He is indeed at times. Lately, he's gone on the nuts end of conservative rabbit holes, a result of overconsumption of the media kind. He has good qualities but is easily aroused by conniving, talking heads. Guess you could say he fits into Stu's suggestion of being too easily influenced and angered. That amygdala hijack. He also doesn't understand why I'm taking these risks on behalf of our podcast. And he doesn't listen to the podcast, right? Peter chided. Molly clicked her tongue as she walked through her bedroom door. Episode 13, Numbers. The three set off in the morning, using the rental car, to drive to the police department. A harsh easterly wind was blowing in, too cold for September, and Ears had to run inside to grab another jacket. Cold winds irritated him, amplifying the pain of his inner ear muscles as they contracted in response to the frigid weather. Molly was visibly upset, as the conversation didn't go well with her boyfriend the prior evening. He demanded that she needed to come back to their apartment. She felt he was being insensitive to her desires to be more cautious. He then vaguely referred to a previous girlfriend, a not-so-subtle threat. You seem quiet this morning, Ears observed. She shook her head in disgust. Men. I'll exclude you two from that generalization, for the moment. Pig-headed and self-centered, the lot of them. What? Only for a moment? Peter frowned at her in the rear-view mirror. This moment. All men are guilty until proven innocent, ruled by gonadotropin and impulsiveness. I can't understand why women haven't revolted. You know, The tech exists today to create whatever Y-chrome features and spermatozoa we desire, so why do we need you guys any longer? I'm pretty nice, Peter asserted. Ears is a decent guy. Guilt by association. You boys are on Molly's short leash. My ribs aren't happy today, and I'm not able to do my kung fu so well because of them. Enough right there to rile me. Ears replied. I've seen you do it, but how often do you actually exercise? 4 hours a day. Whoa. How do you find the time? She looked at Ears in the front passenger seat and placed her hand on his shoulder. I don't sleep, sweetie, not much. Between martial arts, meditation, the podcast, 2 other jobs, and the boyfriend, life gets filled up fast. I suppose that may change now, given the bank balance. Luckily, meditation reduces the sleep I need. After 6 hours or so, I'm up. My choice is to lay there longer and experience euphoric waking, or I can avoid that pleasure and get something done, which is the usual case. Euphoric waking? What's that? Peter wondered. I didn't tell you. It happened around year 6 of Kung Fu, long ago. I meditate 20 minutes before bed. When I awaken 6 hours later, my entire body feels euphoric. The conversation sparked Peter's interest because he always felt tired when he got out of bed. Euphoric. What does that mean? She finally smiled. Hard to describe. The closest thing to it is, well, a post-orgasmic feeling that extends for however long I stay in bed. Peter's jaw dropped, and Ears turned to gaze at her. I want some of that, he exclaimed. Peter slowed the car. More on orgasmic euphoria later, team, as I'm also very curious, but not now. We've arrived. They parked and were ushered into a classic police station meeting room. The walls were industrial beige with hard tile flooring. At one side was a mirrored window, and at the other was a white board and markers. The light fixture was an old fluorescent that cast an abrasive flickering, bluish-white tone everywhere. In the middle of the room was a single small metal table and 4 cushionless metal chairs. Do you guys bring the criminals in here to interrogate them? Molly questioned her friend as they sat down. You bet, but don't feel bad for them. Feel bad for us. I've been in here many hours at a time, knocking heads in a verbal sense. They chuckled. Again, I'm Officer Sal Gracelli. Molly and I attended high school together. Was she as hard-ass back then as she is now? Peter interjected. He nodded. Yes, that's why we got along so well. Our chief detective will arrive in a minute. He'll cover what we found on your kidnapping, Molly. He then shifted his eyes to Peter. We'll also review the vandalism of your house and car. And I can't leave out the nasty emails and texts you're encountering. Do you think they're interrelated? Ears wondered. Let's wait for the detective. A few seconds later, the detective barged in the door. He was in his mid-50s, overweight, and in a short-sleeved white shirt that partially hung out over his belt. He had thinning salt and pepper locks, and a similar blanket of hair swept across his arms and up through his collar, nearly reaching his chin. Why doesn't he cut that chest hair? Molly wondered. The guy could even be attractive, but he's a veritable ape. Detective Brandon. I know who each of you are and what you do, so no need for further introductions. Let's get to business. Grasping a black marker in his thick hands, he drew 3 circles as he talked. I speak in pictures since it provides a different dimension. Here is our variant community. Your clippers are here, chippers, then grippers. I won't draw the hybrids of those, as you can assume they're living in the margins. And here, he drew another circle, just barely overlapping the grippers, are the mechs. You know who they are. He turned to them. With me so far? They nodded. Molly, about this guy who kidnapped you. We investigated and found a solid lead. She sat up attentively. But let me preface this before I discuss our leads. He set the marker down and placed both of his large hands on the table, uncomfortably close to them. Understand how volatile things have gotten in the last few weeks since this obelisk announcement. If this was the only kidnapping or vandalism or hate mail we'd seen, then Sal and I could go home at night and enjoy our lives. These weeks have been special though, and not in a good way. He drew back and grabbed the marker again, facing them. We're doing the best we can, but we're not staffed for this level of disruption. Been a much higher degree of social unrest and even revolt in some variant communities, and I'll get to that. But it doesn't stop there. People are being jolted from core beliefs about who they are and how they should act. The social disarray everywhere further pushes them off balance, and that includes non-variants too. The detective turned back to the board and pounded his marker against the mech circle. These mechs are extending farther out on the edge. I don't know fully what's egging them on, and probably need one of those Harvard psychiatrists to figure that out. But we're looking at it, taking note of threatening social traffic in crazy discussions about generations. Generations? Can you explain that term? Peter inquired. Since Ears was in touch with the variant community, he added, it means successive generations of mech tech. Kind of like software revs. The next generation is superior to the previous. Got it, the detective continued. Not to get too technical, but mechs are focusing on these generations to continually upgrade their physical capabilities, using successive sequences of augmentation to obtain the next version of arm or leg or whatever. Consider the latest integration of GD tech, where the skin and tissue adapt or congeal in a superior way to the metal. Well, it's persuading that community to perceive that they possess the superior technology to become the most obvious, survivable post-obelisk species. Molly was impatiently waiting to understand how this related to her captor. The guy they first took out. Where was he in this, and why was I his target? The detective folded his arms. Wish we had that figured. He was tied to these more radical mechs, part of the culture, but he himself was not vocal on the superiority front. He knew people, but wasn't a captain or even private in the legion they appear to be recruiting. We're doing what we can to ensure this legion doesn't get off the ground and take over Rome, if you will. But you need to put that in context with the resources we have right now, including the Boston PD and others. They've got their own troubled groups in the city brewing a nasty cup of joe. Molly was frustrated. I get that. But why me? As far as we can tell, the man was intrigued by your presence on the podcast. Could be a run-of-the-mill kidnapper or stalker who liked the sound of your voice or the pictures he saw of you on the web. We hope that's the case, since you pretty effectively eliminated that trouble. However, we have another line on this. Gets to your instances of vandalism, Pete. Are these interrelated? Peter wondered. We can't rule it in, but we can't rule it out. Our data guys are recently seeing a pickup in volatile social media traffic among the mechs. They're hypersensitive to anyone or anything, exposing alternative solutions to our new alien threat. Their credo is that we will not win against the invading hordes if the only thing we have going for us is good old skin and bones. I'm not saying they're proposing that everyone should augment to full robotics and only robotics. They definitely are, however, suggesting far more robotics well over 50-50, and they don't react kindly to those with competing alternatives. Ears raised his hand. You mean Molly's kidnapping, the texts and emails and social media, and the vandalism, is because mechs think they're the answer, and they're pissed that our podcast is suggesting other options? We've heard that elsewhere. The detective nodded. Read those texts and emails. Certain people don't want you to continue the podcast path you're headed on. The higher your listener counts go, the more danger to you is implied. How many more of those shows are left to play? About a dozen more are planned in the series, Ears responded. He nodded his head in concern. Just letting you know the facts. If you proceed, understand there's considerable risk to your collective well-being. Let's be sure you stay safe. We can't keep an officer posted to one of you, much less each of you, due to too many pressing priorities of increasing intensity. That damn obelisk. It was difficult enough before with our minuscule budgets, but now it's impossible to run this department. We have my friends, sir, my martial arts friends. I'll keep a few of them hanging around. Good. Good. And I'd counsel you to avoid going out alone, since you're stronger in numbers. Do any of you carry firearms? No, they responded. He clasped his hands and sighed. Then keep your eyes open. We'll watch as closely as possible, though most of our squads are out on active crimes at this point and can't waste time monitoring threats. Molly, we understand you're employed in a few jobs. Can you peel any of those back? Molly grinned, remembering her new bank balance. That problem is resolved for now. Good, good. Power in numbers. Just remember it may save your skins. Any cell phones or other trackable network devices? We've been keeping them at home when out on interviews. Don't want anyone tracking our comings and goings, Peter disclosed. Tech, damn tech. You know, there was a time when having a cell phone was a good thing, and now it's just an excuse for criminal activity with hackers who are either one-upping the data companies, or those cell providers are selling your real-time location data to marketers, presumably, meaning anyone can track anyone. The brief meeting concluded and they left the station, humbled by the news. Guys, Molly confided as they entered the rental car garage to change vehicles. I'm feeling unsettled. Nothing worse than being naked and afraid. Anymore, I trust my senses, except when I stupidly parked my car in the dark. But that's not the point. Despite what I said about taking a week off, I feel we need to accelerate these interviews. If we do them faster, we can edit and queue them. And if we get additional heat from the unknown threats, be they mechs or otherwise, we'll just limit our external exposure and keep below the radar for a while. Peter, your parents are now in Minnesota, right? That's the type of place I'm considering. Smaller risks, less chance someone in town will want to confront us. In other words, we can go incognito in Toledo. That's in Ohio, Ears pointed out. Needed something that rhymed, my dear. What do you boys say? Peter stopped the car. The car rental people were approaching the vehicle. God gave me no sense of intuition, so I'm game to go with yours, Molly. Ears, where are you on the idea? Still buzzing with $1 million+ in the bank. Right now, I have no worries beyond risking our lives. With this social disarray, I'm in a time that will never happen again, and I don't want to be sleeping through it or sitting in front of a screen at home, afraid to get our job done. Let's hammer through and finish the series as Molly suggests. I'll do the schedule rearranging. Most people have a better idea of their next few weeks than their next few months anyway. We're on a roll, big time. Wonder what our Texan friend will do for our ratings. Also, We need to consider changing advertisers now that the numbers are in the stratosphere. I'm getting non-stop pings on my nets. They're now asking me if they can advertise on our show, not vice versa. When they arrived at the condo, they found a note on the front door to pick up a package at the front office, and Ears ran down to retrieve it. The return address was titled Control Freak. I'm hoping it's two things, he panted, out of breath after climbing the stairs with the package. I forgot to mention that Polly also needed to return the Sony with our bioethyl interview. He opened the package. Enclosed was the Sony and a thumb drive that instructed him to go online to get the access code to Stu's interview. Ears played the recording aloud in the kitchen as Molly listened in. Peter, come hear this, Molly demanded. He trotted into the kitchen. Wow, Ears declared, a perfect recording. Amazing how they masked his voice. You can't even hear the accent, and they even changed his colloquialisms. One of his helpers must have been up for hours, working this. Could be that Polly girl you took a liking to, Molly teased. I did not. How could you tell? She seemed sensitive, like someone else I know, and very polite. So what? I can take an interest. If she wasn't tied to Stu, who knows what she'd say about hanging with me. I'm a decent gent. Polly placed her hand on his. Ears, buddy, you're far more than decent. There will be a woman, variant or non, who'll come around to that soon enough, though not while we're slopping up your place. Ears looked up at Peter, who had grabbed a glass of juice. Yeah, Ears. Give us a few years here, and we'll eventually be out of your way. He then paused. No complaints, my friend, as your place is great. I'm even getting accustomed to the sofa bed, though I do miss my house. Peter, I'm okay to use the sleeper. We can trade, Molly offered. No, please. With your hour-long showers, you'll make better use of the bath in the bedroom than I will, and I have this half bath out here for most of my needs. Let's stick with the status quo. It's working. And I'm with the best podcast team in the business during these waning times. What do you mean, waning times? Molly wondered. Do you remember that misspelling of soap on my car window? Waning with an E, spelled improperly. A day or two later, I saw Dirksen, my buddy who sells papers on the square. An article in his paper also spelled the headline story like that. Something about the obelisk being a wanning from aliens. I cut the article out and put it on my wall in the studio. Thought you'd seen it. Ears looked perturbed. Some connection, perhaps? That paper is run by Varants, probably Mex more than anyone else. Makes you wonder. I'm guessing it's a coincidence. Nobody is that blatant or stupid, Peter argued. Molly grabbed the drive. I'll load this and get it ready to rock. We run Control Freak day after tomorrow at 4. We should play bioethyl on Friday, same time. It'll be a special edition, then we can work the others as fast as we get them. I don't mean that we should always do 2 a week, but we may want to see how that works, since the weeks ahead will be unpredictable, given the city curfews being imposed. I prefer to get them ready to go, and not worry about having periods of dead air. We could then replay these special runs in regular time slots, shifting around to make sure everyone hears them. I like it, Peter concurred. Ears, you have 10 or so lined up, right? Yep. 12 more weeks and we're right into the holidays, Peter added with glee. We might spread these out and do a few more reruns than usual. If we slam and jam and run revised stings at the front and back, then we can cruise into the holidays and enjoy ourselves in lovely Minnesota with my parents. Molly pulled her hair up to pin it back. It'll be so much fun to be with your parents for the holidays, Peter. I met them, and they're real sweethearts. They'll surely love the three of us arriving incognito in Toledo, like White Christmas 80 years later." "Getting old," he smirked. "They're in Bemidji. Given the weather that time of year, at least we won't need to use tennis rackets to swat away the mosquitoes or keep them from mating with the birds." "Numbers," Ears yelled excitedly, staring at his screen in the bedroom. "What numbers?" Peter and Molly were each listening to the control freak interview in different parts of the condo, and they ran upstairs to view his vid screen. "Texas-sized," Peter exclaimed with surprise. Ears was ecstatic. "Yeah, approaching the state's population." "We should prep for this, guys," Molly advised, pacing the carpet in her bare feet. "Ears mentioned the advertisers, and you're running that down, but 7 million active streamers? Can you see the distribution by country?" He clicked his laptop screen. "Right there," he pointed out. "Over 80% in North America." Peter was shaking his head in disbelief. "You don't suppose Stu juiced it that much, do you? Nobody can hold that kind of swagger, y'all." "Oh, Peter," Ears bellowed, "I haven't bothered you because you seem too busy. Word is out everywhere. I've seen ads placed for the podcast the last few days. They weren't our ads, so they must have been Stu's doing. We're talking Madison Avenue, baby." Peter tried to calm himself. The idea of rocketing from 4,000 regular streamers and downloaders to millions within a few weeks was mind-boggling. He tapped his foot nervously against the bedpost. "You're making me crazy, Peter," Ears complained, "and I'm usually the one with the motor foot. What are you conjuring? Aren't you happy?" Peter scratched his head. "Not to burst our bubbles, folks, but I've read about those other pod stars who carry on their shoulders a whole different set of considerations. Big teams, admins, virtual assistants, ad agencies, press interfaces, web teams. We're 3 people compared to them. Tiny." Molly interjected, "I don't see how the numbers matter anyway, not right now. We need to put our eyes forward and walk the path we've laid out. If we get distracted with fame and glory, we'll fall off the face of the planet when the next run gets delayed. We can't afford that, and we're doing something positive right here. Good karma. Let's press on." Peter still looked concerned. "That's what I'm worried about. My head isn't wrapped around fame. We understood our audience at 4,000, but we need to analyze the new demographics and psychographics and social data. There's just not time given our schedule." He paused for a second and rubbed his chin. "And don't let me get an oversized head, you two. This stuff doesn't simply happen. Someone or something is juicing us. Clearly our Texan friend in part, but it must be more than that." "Great engineering?" Molly jabbed. "I'm with you, Peter," Ears admitted. "I'm seeing angst, lots of angst everywhere. People are stirred incessantly by the intentional agitation of our mega media factory toilets, outlets. Nobody is covering the content that we are, a thoughtful view at what's being suggested as alternatives to the threat. Hell, the network news is still arguing about where the obelisk might have originated from and when they'll arrive, which is irrelevant. If it arrived here the way it did, some nasty creatures may be following close behind, regardless of planet of origin, and the few days or years it takes to arrive at our whistle stop. But with so many new patrons, we're only releasing more murder hornets into the sky after our Texan friend finishes talking in a few minutes," Peter observed. "More hornets and more deadly little stings." Molly continued pacing. "And more reasons to put our noses to the grindstone. We need to limit our interfaces and entertain nobody unless they're associated with the interviews. After we get them all queued and ready to go, Only then should we deal with the paparazzi and advertisers and anyone else who wants a piece of us. Sound like a plan? They both nodded their heads in agreement. Episode 14, Omnibiv. The trio arose early on Friday to meet with Omnibiv, but they first wanted to check the number of streams and downloads of Control Freak's interview. Over 13 million combined, Peter choked in disbelief. I can't handle my media anymore, either email or social. No doubt you guys are the same? I don't even glance at it. Too many requests and too little time, much less the usual loonies and haters, Molly confessed. 2 national networks called me, Molly, while you were washing your hair during your usual morning sabbatical in the bathroom. Hey, she complained, at least I have hair. Ouch. Ears winced, glancing sideways at Peter's balding head. I'll get you back later, he grimaced. They want to do segments with us, like 10-minute interviews. We're getting noticed, but I'm not sure if that's good or bad. And better yet, or worse yet, that conspiracy storyline of Stu's is hitting the national and international feeds. You shouldn't search on that podcast right now because you'll hear cuts of your lilting voice. It'll fry your board, Ears added. Back to business, Molly commanded. We're running bioethyl today at 4, on our special day. Ears, you confirmed our interview today with Omnibiv? Yes, ma'am. And you're good with the list of questions, Peter? Indeed, ma'am. Okay, then does anyone know where we're headed this morning? I do, Ears replied, and I asked your 2 kung fu buddies to tail us. Let's hit it, and hope we can avoid our new fans at the gate. The 3 arrived at Omnibev's location, a centuries-old red brick building at the shipyard. After ensuring Molly's protectors also arrived without incident, they walked up a modern metal staircase to the 2nd floor. It was a large office converted to a studio condo, empty in the front room except for a short-legged white table surrounded by 4 white modern chairs. The trio entered. Hello, Ears yelled. We're here. Okay, a woman's sultry voice responded. I'll be there in a minute. Ears noticed that one of the chairs differed from the others, integrating a distinct softball-sized hole between the seat and chair back. Humum hybrid, Molly surmised, referring to the relatively new human-mammal genetic mixes. Guess so, Ears confirmed. Seeing a bit more of that among the Clipper variant class lately. Very trendy. A tall, slender woman entered the room. She was dressed in a tight white leather jumpsuit with short sleeves and pant legs that stopped mid-calf. Spiked white heels amplified her height. Expensive, Molly thought. Everything about her is expensive. They introduced themselves, but it was only when she turned to sit in her chair that Peter caught a better view of her tail and mane. Seductive and shimmering, the mane's auburn hair protruded 2 inches from her neckline. Her petite, 3-foot-long tail was adorned with the same hair and curled at the end. Peter was dying to ask her how long she'd been a hybrid, as he knew this degree of refined geedy tech had to be very recent. In sophisticated circles, however, he understood that it was considered impolite to ask or take notice of such variant augmentations. Molly placed the Sony on the table, and Peter began the interview. Our internal name for you was Omnibev, as in omnibenevolent, meaning friendly across animal types. We'll call you Bev, if that's okay. In this series we're running, we focus on various responses to the latest events in the news, particularly the obelisk threat. But I don't want to discuss only that topic, since it has consumed the media and is almost boring at this juncture. We also intend to cover other aspects of new tech from a variant's perspective. I'm fine with this plan since I'm a variant myself, given that your listeners cannot see me. I began to pursue this path as soon as the tech surfaced a decade ago. First in elusive ways, then more aggressively. What do you see as the most significant recent developments in Gedi? Peter asked. No doubt the newer scroll capabilities, she replied. Can you please describe scroll for our audience? Our listener base has expanded as of late, and some may not be 100% aware of the latest capabilities. Gladly. Without getting too technically deep about the prior tech, they first located the targeted DNA sequences from specific donor animals that were already present in an archaic form in the host human's genome. These donor sequences were then cut and pasted into the host's genetic material, creating new code within the host's germ cells. The initial instances of this technology were utilized to produce the woolly mammoth, woolly rhinoceros, and saber-toothed tigers, among other revived species in the last few years. As we all should know, this early form of Gedi tech propagated only into the offspring through the germ cells. This was obviously a painfully long process for slowly reproducing mammals like humans. She curled her tail around the chair and started stroking the end of it. Scroll, however, is a revolutionary new development from that humble beginning. It propagates the desired characteristics back into the host's own genetic structure, in real time and across the various cell types. In other words, it does not require a generation of offspring for the desired traits to present themselves. Scroll was invented as an outgrowth of gene drive tech that gives a desired characteristic to all germ cells, not just half. I'm probably getting too deep for some at this point. But understand that this new scroll capability was so desirable and low cost that it has become widely acceptable and available in the last few years. By itself, scroll has contributed substantially to our ever-expanding variant community. Peter added, I guess it's all just code, right? Interesting analogy, Peter. If you consider a corollary in computer code, you could say that scroll allows the new program code to be integrated readily into the existing release. Right? I mean, each of us is only an outcome of the current release of our DNA software. So scroll tech implies you don't need to wait years for the next major release to achieve the desired results. It's just a code update that disseminates through the entity system. Perhaps most of your listeners are already familiar with what I stated. I'm not sure that's true of our audience any longer, Peter admitted, but we appreciate the explanation, Bev. In an otherwise normal time, we could discuss questions on life as a variant, including the positives and negatives. Oh, there are few negatives, she interjected. Yes, but our listeners might prefer we get to the biggest question first, as related to the obelisk. When we contacted you, we got the impression that the hybrid human-animal variant community had their own thoughts for countering this new threat from the sky. She put her hand forward, signaling Peter to stop talking. We prefer the term mammalian variants, but what you said is fine. The term human is less acceptable for a variety of reasons. To your point, she emphasized, still stroking her tail, many views exist in our community, yet there is a directional trend in our discussions. And what direction is that taking? According to your Control Freak podcast, this obelisk obsession may blow over as the biggest hoax in history. However, let's set that aside for a moment and conclude that it's a real threat. We should at least have a few days to prepare for an invasion, she smiled, if not a few centuries or solar lives for that matter. In that regard, however, one must still hope for the best, assume the worst, and prepare accordingly. Don't you agree? I suppose, as some people are indicating. The mammalian variant discussions are trending to options not covered widely, outside our own community as yet. Conversations focus on expanding the hybridization capabilities underway currently, placing more federal and international funds towards these efforts. Peter looked confused. To what end? How does increased mammalian hybridization of humans resolve the alien invaders' risk? It's not a resolution per se, but a mitigation. What's being mitigated? That depends on how we perceive ourselves relative to the alien life forms, but mostly vice versa. In other words, what's more important is how the aliens might perceive themselves relative to the planet's various inhabitants. If aliens were to arrive tomorrow, what are the odds they'd wipe out every species on the planet? This might take considerable effort, down to every bacterium 5 miles underground in what little remains of the Arctic ice sheets. Coming from that baseline, you must ask yourself the same question, all the way to the top of the food chain, if you will. As she reached for her glass of water, Peter noticed the thin layer of burnished auburn hair covering her arm. "I'm getting there, but I'm not sure what you mean by that last comment, Bev." She placed the glass gently back onto the table. "We must consider how high up that taxonomic chain the aliens are likely to go before they hit their cutoff point." Cutoff point? Yes, the point at which they say, every species above this evolutionary grade is too dangerous to retain. Is that point an insect? Squid? Squirrel? Cat? Is it all primates? Only great apes? Mammalian variant? Unaltered humans? Peter was stunned at her rationale. "You're suggesting the marauders will allow some taxonomic hierarchies to remain intact, but eliminate others, correct?" "Yes. Wouldn't you?" Think about it for a minute, and it becomes easy to put ourselves in their shoes. When early European settlers came to this land, they viewed Native Americans as a direct and consequential threat, and they nearly annihilated them. There's little evidence these marauders considered the indigenous peoples as even near equivalents on the evolutionary scale. They left most other less threatening lifeforms on the continent intact. Unless, of course, it was huntable. As egregious and horrific as those historical actions were, I don't even want to go down the huntable path. Too many machine gun-toting folks out there, thinking the aliens are coming to track them as game. Agreed. It's irrational to believe aliens who survived over eons in space are coming to Earth to enjoy the food or sport. Can you be more specific? Molly interjected. Yes, I will be. Every class of human in the world, variant and non, is busy generating their own answers to the impending threat, well considered or not. We mammalian variants are doing the same. It's hard to argue with the concept that we will diminish the impact of aliens scouring humanity from the planet if we more aggressively hybridize with less threatening Earth species. For once in his podcast life, Peter had no comeback. Molly, sensing his surprise, immediately caught on and interjected her own thoughts. In other words, because most humans are currently not mammalian variants, they sport a bigger target on their back for any nasty aliens? Molly guessed. Correct. Over time, we believe humans will need to hybridize in greater numbers with other animal species. This should minimize the risk of appearing threatening to aliens. For example, many studies are emerging that indicate mammalian hybrids are less inclined to overconsume, less likely to destroy their environments, and more grounded in things of the earth. This is much contrasted to the extreme aggression, entitlement, and greed typical of non-hybrids. Therefore, a disciplined plan to advance human mammalian hybridization can reduce our threat level for any conquest-minded alien species. Peter was growing concerned because the discussion was heading in a direction likely to upset most listeners, especially the religious ones who may have joined after the Welcomers show. Human-mammal hybrids were almost unanimously considered miscreants by non-varants, much less those more radical individuals who intermixed with creatures on the lower rungs of the animal evolutionary scale, such as fish, birds, and insects. I'll agree with you that humanity has a far from perfect record of getting along with just about everything, including ourselves, he muttered. Please, Peter, she interjected, let's speak bluntly, shall we? Humans are a cyclical anomaly in nature. They are no different when compared to any species that has become too successful, and by that, I mean too technologically successful for their own long-term survival. For one thing, human bungling made our presence obvious to any potential marauders, as one of your guests recently discussed. There was an uncomfortable moment of silence, then she continued. Every idea should be placed in the fishbowl and considered on its merits. Who do you think would be perceived as the greater threat to invaders? A pure human? Certainly. A chipper or gripper? Even bigger targets, no doubt. Peter was dumbstruck. I have no idea, but we get your point. Then consider more plausible alternatives. A human with some mammalian genetic code? Could be less threatening. Or consider its corollary, a mostly non-human mammalian variant with some human code. Probably far less of an issue to marauders, depending on relative intermixtures. So what is the magic ratio at which invaders would deem the variant non-threatening and simply leave it alone? Molly again saved them from an awkward silence. Basically, you're suggesting to selectively parse different quantities of human DNA into a variety of mammals, or vice versa, right? As with all things human and therefore irrational and unplanned, we can assume that humanity will pursue many simultaneous paths of defense. If so, the race will likely meet an untimely end, since the many paths will indubitably dilute the intended outcome. In contrast, implementing a single omnibenevolent plan is very simple and effective. We can, over time, hybridize humanity extensively within other mammalian species. This will spread our DNA more broadly into the ecosphere, and also spread our risk. The target becomes less obvious to the invaders, and human code will be forever retained within the Earth's genetic biome. She was surprised the team was not challenging her. In the end, what matters is ensuring the code, humanity's DNA, survives this invasion. It is nearly certain we'll lose under any other options being discussed, given our pathetic defenses against such a technologically advanced enemy. This option provides better odds, bar none, according to AI simulations we've run. Peter glanced nervously at his watch, increasingly concerned about this message. Your suggestions are very interesting as well as radically new, I'm sure, to our many listeners. In that context, we're here to discuss alien threat alternatives. We're clearly not suggesting that everyone should go out now and scroll your genes into other species or embed mammalian DNA within your personal genomes. That's one way to say it, she countered. Our community might term it as enhancing oneself as a mammalian variant, but that's a matter of opinion, of course. Peter sighed loudly. Bev, this interview has given us much to consider. We should return at another date to discuss the specific tech, and maybe we can bring a scroll expert into that discussion as well. They ended the session in their typical fashion and left the building, with Molly's two friends in tow via their own vehicle. Peter, Molly observed from the back seat, this was literally on the hairy edge if you catch my drift. You can imagine people getting major disturbed if they go away from this interview with any perception that they'd be forced to actively embed mammalian genes into their own. Or conversely, injecting their genes into a squirrel or lemur simply to ensure that some of their own code is retained through time, Ears noted. Interesting interview, and not only because I'm a variant. I never toyed with animal genetics, as it didn't suit me. But did you catch Bev's gorgeous mane and tail? Those augments perfectly complemented her physiology. I agree, Peter confirmed. She was quite charming and alluring. You don't see too many of her kind out on the streets of Boston, albeit for obvious cost reasons. I wonder if most mammalian variants are like this. Folks, please. Enough with the charming and alluring bit. She's a woman with a hairy wolf's mane and tail. Can you imagine how much she sheds around the house? And what about animal allergies? She's no more alluring than anything else I've seen. Ooh, Peter giggled. Didn't mean to hit a sensitive note there. Molly harumphed and sat back in her seat. Episode 15, Og Girl. Peter and Ears stayed at the condo during the playout of bioethyl that afternoon. Molly needed to run out on errands with her 2 protector companions and returned as dusk approached. Guys. Molly shouted, walking through the front door. Guys. I'm right here, Peter yelled from the kitchen. We're getting so much heat, it's beyond measure. Wait, don't tell me about the show yet. My news is critical. Where's Ears? Peter lifted his hands from the keyboard and patted his neck and shoulders. It was the sign that Ears was plugged into his multiple feeds. A pair of earbuds were inserted into each set of ears, allowing him to consume multiple audio feeds at once. Enhancing this capability, the large vidscreen in his bedroom displayed many screens at once. Molly ran upstairs to knock on his door, then came running down with him. She signaled for both to sit. News from the PD. A break in the kidnap story. Their detectives found my captor was working with radical mechs to a greater degree than they originally thought. My friend could only tell me so much, but the FBI is involved. The hints at this are more sinister than you might imagine. I can imagine Major Sinister, Ears contended. Crime ring. Organized. Mech thing, right? Peter wondered. Peter. Molly pleaded. Let me finish. The mechs are radicalizing in a big way, partially due to the new wave of integrated machine tech, including direct AI-to-brain integration. They're quickly perfecting it. Recall this generation's mantra, the faster they advance, the faster they advance. Moore's law maxed and folded upon itself. Big money's involved as well. Most of these people, mechs I mean, are on the flip side of stupid. They're altering how global fund flows are transacted and making big bucks on the margins like no non-variant could. Then they're using those funds to advance their tech and agendas. But why you? Peter asked. It wasn't just me they were after, not by a long margin. They're going after the media in general, anyone or any company suggesting solutions to the problem. That's confirmed. The FBI found patterns elsewhere in the world. Anywhere or anytime they can silence competing or conflicting voices, they will. Peter shook his head in disbelief. Come on. Seriously? Seems like a futile plan. The media are so diverse with so many voices. If you silence one, a million others will pop up. Ears was also troubled. An effective strategy would be to take out the culprits with the loudest voices first, then work down the list. They paused for a moment, knowing what this meant. The more audience we get, the bigger the target is on our back, as Bev might say. It's just a different hunter going after us, that's all, Molly observed. Peter closed his eyes and scratched his forehead. Are you saying we should back off what we're doing, for our own safety? Return to the old, general science format, and de-emphasize the more edgy alien threat proposals? For better or for worse, one thing my years of martial arts taught me is to never fear. Evaluate, be sensitive to trouble, but never fear. We should stay on our path since going back is not an option. What we can do, though, is mix things up and keep them off balance. Let's intersperse shows that are not directly associated with the obelisk, though I understand it's hard for anyone at this stage to not mention it in every sentence. She knelt to look at Ears. We just ran bioethyl, right? She mentioned the mechs and letting nature run its course, which is compatible with the radicalized mech philosophy. Right. She was nearly a proponent of that thought, letting evolution run amok. Clearly non-threatening if you're a mech. Agreed, Peter added, but putting Omnibiv on for this coming Wednesday throws more gasoline on the bonfire. Can we delay her, Ears? And whom might you suggest as a counterbalance? Peter paused for a moment, as if he had to think. How about Jennifer, the woman I met in the coffee shop? You said you had contacted her. Jennifer? Who's that? Molly questioned. Someone Peter's sweet on, I sense, Ears divulged before Peter could utter a word. Molly was not going for it. Sweet. We're having someone on the show because Peter is overcome by her mysterious wiles? Ears, please. Jennifer is an augmenter. Just Augies and temple chips. I smashed her foot in the coffee shop. Molly raised her eyebrows. Intentionally? Of course not. I was walking and reading at the same time. My fault. It might be nice to have someone like her on the pod who's been in and around VR and AR tech since the early days. She was dubious. How old is this youngster? 18-ish? Legal age, even? Oh, same age as us, I imagine, Peter responded sheepishly. It could reduce the heat. As Molly and Peter were conversing, Ears went upstairs to grab his laptop, then ran back downstairs. Beyond your Cambridge PD news, I wanted to give you the stats results. It's hard to say where this might be if we'd run bioethyl in our regular Wednesday 4 o'clock time slot. Considering we were well over 13 million after our Texan friend ran, our bioethyl Friday show came in at a cool 7 million actives. Not bad for a special day, since people needed to get the word on our additional playdate. But not all is good. Meaning? Molly asked. Meaning that Stu is being widely panned by media outlets big and small. Us along with him. They're suggesting we're amateurs getting audience share bumps by stirring the pot of radical conspiracy theories. They're saying he's a fraud, and the inferences he made are only an attempt to juice our numbers for ad money and ratings. Molly rolled her eyes. I can't believe we're even being mentioned in the big-time media. To some, that might be a good thing, but I prefer to be under the radar. Can't we let the host take the heat instead? I don't think so, Ears replied. These articles called us out by name in multiple segments over the last few hours. Even included me, and I hardly ever squeak a note. She sighed and plopped onto Ears' beanbag chair. Kids, my dad was in the Navy. I think it's damn the torpedoes like he used to say. So screw the haters. Let's run our Omnibiv session on Wednesday. And should we do another special run on Friday? Peter wondered. Molly clicked her tongue. Go get your girlfriend then. But if she's so non-threatening, it would be nice to introduce her by her real name, assuming she's okay with that. It might help offset comments that we're interviewing Joe Blows with pseudonyms and pseudo-expertise. Jessica what again? Jennifer, Ears and Peter both responded. The weekend passed without incident. Peter texted Jennifer to show up on Monday, and Molly took off for a martial arts retreat with her systems grandmaster. At the knock on the door, Peter jumped up to view the monitoring cameras. There was Jennifer, Augies intact. Hi Jennifer. Glad you could make it on short notice. He turned around and motioned to Ears. This is Ears, my good friend, with whom you've spoken. Please come in and have a seat. Jennifer was regally decked out in blue, with blue Augies to match her thin sweater and tight blue jeans, a blue belt and blue leather heels. The jeans accented her slim figure, and her near-perfect complexion was complemented by a small mole at the side of her chin. Her long black hair was swept to one side, exposing a modest gold chain wound tightly around her neck. Peter was smitten by her presence, and he stumbled over his words as the two explained the podcasting process to her. Because they had previously retrieved the mixer and microphones from Peter's house, they were able to create an impromptu studio in Ears' living room. Jennifer sat on the sleeper sofa, with Peter and Ears in chairs. You weren't limping? Peter observed. Limping? Oh, my foot. Your massaging helped there, but I need another go-round, she smiled. Did it mess up your bike race? No, it went just fine. Good. We'll start right in then. He paused for the intro sting, then resumed. Hello, listeners. We're taking a break today from our focus on solutions to the obelisk crisis. Instead, today's topic is augmentation and the Augie lifestyle. Our guest is Jennifer. That's her real name, though for security's sake we are not providing more. Jennifer, can you give us some context on how your interest started in chipper tech? Peter was hoping she might remove her Augies during the interview, but he was afraid to ask for fear it might appear rude. He knew other Augies who were sensitive to removing their devices, and he considered it no different than asking someone to place their cell phone out of the room while he was interviewing them. Momentary distractions from devices or systems were simply a part of life almost from birth, and most people never dreamed of being disconnected from their networks, irrespective of access methodology. Jennifer leaned towards her mic. It started with gaming, I suppose. My older brothers were avid gamers and still are. They play them and they make them. Are they chipper Augies too? Yes, though more integrated than me. In those days, we were wearing those clunky old headsets. They were so uncomfortable. Fifth-generation things. Not user-friendly and very restrictive in terms of where you could go. Can you describe what's changed since those times relative to headsets? Then let's discuss how the content and your usage has changed. Sure. Chipset integration into neural networks revolutionized our world. As your listeners may know, massive research was being poured into Augie tech starting in the late teens. Once the ability to pass biochemical and bioelectrical signals across neural nets was perfected, especially for the optic nerve network, then it was Katie bar the doors, so to speak, she laughed. Agreed. I'm seeing more and more people with Augies. I wonder if it may not be the same in the rural Midwest, for example. Could this be a Boston bias? It's expanding everywhere, actually. In fact, the tech is more effective in places most in need of economic development. Really? Why is that? I reviewed a university study last night that discussed how augmentation assists farmers. They don't mind being chipped and do this all the time to their livestock with one key difference. Livestock are not rationally wired into the internet, at least not in the same way. A farmer can walk outside in the morning with her Augies on, evaluate the weather report, assess from satellite feeds which plots need watering, evaluate commodities futures, and concurrently determine optimal prices for livestock feed or the health of a particular animal. Often all without speaking a word. Peter mused. The farmer could do much of that a few decades ago with devices like their cell phones. What is the great advantage of having a chipset integrated into your optic nerves? It's hard to explain to a non-variant or someone not accustomed to going through their day with Augies. I suspect you've had experts on your podcast to talk about brain plasticity? Peter thought for a second. Yeah, he whined, it's been a while though. Chipper augmentation and brain plasticity were meant for each other, the perfect couple. Your brain plastically adapts to the many incoming and outgoing feeds. It's no different than Ears, who's sitting here. She directed her gaze at him. You multitask constantly with your multiple oral inputs. Am I correct? Yes, nonstop, Ears replied. I'd say my augmentation screams at me to use it, and I have no choice in the matter. I require the stimulation of sound to keep me centered and focused. It has to be many different sounds from different sources, such as news and information feeds and entertainment. Exactly, Jennifer agreed. I can't say the small chips embedded at my temples are calling out to me in any specific sense. Yet, my plastic brain hungers for constant information, and the visual cortex is the primary pathway. My mind has become a multitasking wizard, and being single-tasking or single-threaded is no longer desirable. Not being a variant myself, Peter confessed, it's hard for me to comprehend. With a plethora of stimuli from multiple concurrent sources, how do you ever get downtime? I mean, can you do the opposite? Can you turn off the desire? I sub-segment. The only way I can describe it. If one input gets overwrought with fatigue, I'll turn that off in my brain and let it rest. I'm taking advantage of my mind's amazing power to task specific things to various areas of gray matter. A lot of science has emerged on this, and it points to Augie variants having this plastic ability to compartmentalize. It's not a trait from birth as much as a learned behavior. Peter was enthralled by Jennifer's mannerisms, her astuteness, and the glib, free nature of the discussion. He wanted to peer behind her Augies at those sparkling blue eyes he remembered from their chance meeting in the coffee shop. The Augies enhanced her air of mystery and desire. Although he could usually contain himself when asking deeper personal questions of guests, he blurted out involuntarily, "What about lovemaking?" She laughed out loud, as did Ears. Peter realized what he said and tried to apologize as his face turned bright red. Wait. I didn't mean that. Let me reword. I didn't intend to pry into your personal life. I meant to ask how you have intimate one-on-ones with someone. Oh Jesus, that didn't come out right either. He turned to Ears for help. Do you understand what I'm saying? Before Ears could respond, Jennifer interjected, I know what you mean, Peter. What makes you think I entertain my pleasures with only one-on-one and not many-on-many? Peter was stupefied, and again looked to Ears, who threw his hands up in the air and shrugged. Ears had never seen Peter this distracted in an interview. Jennifer then reassured him, patting her hand on the table as if it was on his knee. Let me help you get out of this mess, Peter. I'll speak on behalf of the Augie community rather than myself, so you can be less flustered. Sorry, Peter apologized. No need to be sorry. It's a common question to Augie chippers. The answer is that it depends on personal desires. I'll tell you straight out that some Augies never take their devices off, and that means never. even to bed, in the shower, while walking, running, working, making love, or speaking. The devices are indelibly a part of their multitasking, multiviewing, brain-plastic conversations, and they never shut them off. For example, consider being asked to remove your eyes, ears, nose, and tongue, and place them on the table before making love. Peter was not against continuing this line of discussion, but he was uncertain how his new and expanding audience would react, particularly the welcomers evangelicals. Got it. So, shifting to something you said a minute ago. You mentioned the word chipper, and it reminded me that we didn't define for the audience how you see yourself relative to the larger community of chippers. Good segue, Peter. It's a matter of tech integration. My augmentations are 2 small temple chips, a few wires to the optic nerve, as assisted by Geedy tech, and a rechargeable battery pack. People like me go with the general definition of who we are, as Augies, because we're focused on augmenting reality in a visual realm. For instance, with my infrared sensors, I can see how the prior conversation affected multiple areas of your body, and you're flushing red all over, she chided. The extension of visual capacities is endless. I can walk by an Indian food restaurant and see the wonderful smells through my visual cortex. I visualize sounds in amazing color. But mine is only a visual realm thing, for now. It runs the gamut across the larger spectrum of other chipper augmentations. We had a large pickup in audience who may not comprehend. Can you describe the other end of that gamut? Ears requested. Sure. I'll put it this way to your audience. Consider that your every sense can now be augmented and enhanced, either in singulars or in multiples. Speaking of lovemaking and the sense of touch, I know chippers with integrated chipsets to enhance both their physical prowess as well as skin and nerve sensitivities. Or with smell, olfactory chipsets exist that can enhance this sense to far exceed a canine's own smell receptors. It doesn't mean the plastic brain doesn't need to adapt, since it does. And honestly, I'm not so sure how beneficial those olfactory chips are in the subway station when you're riding the blue line at 3 a.m. I can close my eyes if I don't want to see something, but it's hard to do that with breathing. They laughed, and she continued. Beyond the discovery of neural net links, another recent tech is the ability to install chip powering systems to avoid external battery packs. Once internal generators were invented, those generators that use body motion to recharge the integrated batteries, then that was part 2 of Katie Bar the door for the chipper world. Generators also fueled the recent growth of Augie contact lenses, though I still prefer the glasses. And someday soon, we expect, chips and other intrabody devices will be powered by our own mitochondria. Peter looked at his watch. We are getting close to wrap up, Jennifer, so one last question. I started out by suggesting this specific podcast would avoid responses to the obelisk. And we kept to that pretty well. Yes, it was a refreshing interview, especially discussing tech with you, and not getting too heavy on any impending alien doom or how we'll respond to it. There's more coming on that front from us in future podcasts, and I assume, many others who are podcasting across the globe. But now for that last question. You get non-stop feeds from many sources, and you compose emails and texts and do everything else without ever lifting a finger. Correct, she responded. Similar to speaking them or typing them. I just feel them and they happen. Great. Back to the obelisk and advanced societies, for a moment. Would you care to predict where we'll be with chipper tech in another 20 years? I'm thinking only pure chippers, if we can set aside our hybrid genetic clipper and gripper communities. Glad to, Peter. I'm constantly in touch with countless sources of information. It's a wide and rich ecosystem in which I live. This has taught me to appreciate the tremendous diversity of the planet. I'm never running out of space in my brain or challenges to utilize the vast storehouse of cloud data about this glorious planet and its living and non-living components. I can process this kind of info while sending you a thank you email for this interview simply by thinking it, which I just did. In other words, it's efficient, Peter concluded. Yes, she affirmed. In my book, in the history books, in commerce and human life, efficiency always wins the day. It outlasts biases, fears, and speculation. To respond to your question, however, it's clear to me that almost every human will have to integrate at least some degree of variant tech in the next 10 to 20 years. They won't be able to compete or comprehend their world without it. Life is moving too fast to be stuck in the crawl lane. Meaning? Ears interjected. Meaning, in the future, the impact of not being augmented will be so great as to economically or socially disadvantage your life. For instance, there was a time when people in developing countries had no access to the net. Once cellular was there, they needed to buy expensive phones, the phone prices came down, and commerce greatly expanded. The world started waking up after that in numerous ways, and it became a must-have. I'm suggesting that augmentation is the next stage of device and human evolution in our efficiency-oriented lives. We will augment to survive and thrive. Peter ended the interview on that note, then walked Jennifer to her car. About those guys milling around your door, she inquired. Who were they? My scans tell me they're members of Molly's Kung Fu studio, but they weren't just hanging around for fun, no? Peter opened her car door. A long story about trouble with radicalized mechs. I'll tell you sometime. And when does sometime arrive? She appealed. My foot occasionally gets shooting pains after you embedded your tennis shoe onto my arch. I could use more shiatsu massage. Always unaware of even the most direct hints from females, Peter's hormones happened to be awake for once. This week? Okay. Both feet to balance the chi. I'll expect a text. Peter beamed and waved as she closed the door and drove away. Can she see me waving with those Augies on? He wondered. Episode 16, Across the Bow. Molly arrived at the condo late that evening from her martial arts seminar. My buds were great to stick around here while I was with the Grand Master. I just asked them to leave though. We're switching off places, so they're attending tomorrow's seminar. I hope we can make do without our guardians at the door. Peter was finishing dinner in the kitchen. We'll survive. The fact that the PD is on the case has hopefully diminished the threat level. Maybe so, Ears responded from his upstairs bedroom, but let's not get overconfident. Molly whispered to Peter, the boy has ears like an elephant. I heard that. Ears shouted as he trotted downstairs to the kitchen. Guys, we're queued up for Omnibiv to play out in 2 days at our usual Wednesday time slot. Plus, I just finished working out the kinks from Jennifer's interview this morning. Kinks? Did Peter's young obsession botch her interview? Peter was slightly annoyed. She did fine, he grumbled, covering his mouth. Ears sensed Molly's sensitivity to this subject and didn't want to embellish. It went okay. What did you think of the interview, Peter? Molly taunted. She's a nice girl, woman. Clean interview. Non-toxic. Meaning? Molly wondered. It was non-controversial, Ears reassured her. Exactly in line with our plan to soften the messaging on defenses to the alien threat. This was much more tech-oriented around augmentation and what her peers are doing. I don't recall mentioning the obelisk in any threatening context, Peter added. Okay, I'm sure I'll have comments after Ears finishes the edits. She pulled up a chair. Can we talk about what's next? I'm energized after my workout today, and I want to plan out this week. Ears grabbed a carton of almond milk from the refrigerator and sat with them. 2 more are lined up per our accelerated plan, and possibly a third. Please tell us, amigo. Wednesday morning is the Bard. The Bard. Love that name, Peter chuckled. Can you help me again on his story? He's the nanorobot, synthlife guy. And what a wonderful array of tech to cover, based on our brief conversation. Great, thanks. Who else? Oort Cloud, though that name has nothing to do with the ring of comets and debris hurling around our solar system. There is an interesting cross-reference, if you think about it, to a bunch of comets and asteroids bumping into each other, fragmenting and recombining. Not sure I get the connection, my friend, Molly confided. Who is he again? A surgeon well known in Boston circles who fixes the unfixable, especially the mess of off-target outcasts that black market geedy tech is creating. Oh yeah, I've seen a number of feeds on the issue, she noted. Sounds like it's a growing problem. Another good one, though, where we're not focusing on the obelisk. My point entirely. This guy is one of the best in Boston. He's my surgeon, if you must know, and he's helped with some of my issues. Issues? Peter asked. I don't speak of it much, but my clipper tech has caused problems. None of this genetic stuff is perfect, even with high-grade geedy. Molly clasped his hand. Ears, I never hear you complain. We all carry our little burdens, friends. Glad I don't complain like some others at the table, he teased, motioning his head towards Peter. Hey, I'm usually the last guy to gripe. I might occasionally mention a hangnail or something, but that's about it. Or how your sneakers rub your knobby toes, or your sore butt from bike riding, or your sinus problems, or how your back always hurts, or your hair, Molly joked. Enough. Peter smirked. I grew up with doting parents. What can I say? They let me complain, so I complained. It's their fault, not mine. Ears and Molly smiled at each other, then someone knocked at the door. It's 9 p.m., and my buds left their guard. Dare we answer it? Peter, can you connect to my front door monitors? Ears requested. Peter logged in. They saw a single man, 6 feet tall and dressed in a dark suit and tie. He held up a badge and waved it in front of the 3 camera feeds. FBI, he insisted. I want to speak with you all for a moment. Ears grabbed Peter's laptop and panned the cameras along the external walkway, but saw nobody else. Ask him to turn around, Molly whispered. Sir, do you mind if we ask you to remove the jacket and turn around? Ears asked through the door speaker. Sure, if it will get you to open the door. He conceded, and they saw no evidence of weapons. Molly took charge. He's obviously been watching us. I'll stay behind the door with my foot wedged. You two do a baby step outside and greet him politely, shake hands, then I'll follow. People are most disoriented in the first seconds of an introduction. I'll be watching his hands and scanning the perimeter since I can't believe he'd come alone. Feds never do. They walked to the door together. From behind the door, Molly heard the man introduce himself as an FBI agent and ask where Molly was. She poked her head around the front of the door, hanging onto the doorknob. You can understand why I'm particularly sensitive to strangers, she confirmed before he could introduce himself. Understood. He has that federal look, Molly thought. Latino, short black hair, great shape, strong build, and can take care of himself. Can we please see your badge and card? No disrespect intended, she requested, putting her hand outward without shaking his. He was still holding his jacket in his left hand, a sign he was hiding nothing. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out his credentials. Special Agent Ramirez, Molly. Pablo Ramirez. From D.C. You could call your friend, but the local team in Boston doesn't know I'm here. Special assignment today. And yes, my partner is there in the car. He pointed to a standard black sedan in the lot. I need less than 15 minutes with you. Molly looked straight into his eyes. She had been trained to make an immediate connection with anyone she met who might present a threat. Staring the opponent down was just another way to project one's strength and prowess. Aha. Badge and card appear legit, but then who knows? Here to assist or arrest, she queried. If it was to arrest you, my partners would be here with a cadre of others in the wings, he smiled. Can we move this conversation inside? It might be better for both of us. In his typical friendly manner, Peter put his arm across the agent's back. Sure, no problem. Peter then forced the door open, despite Molly's partial grip on the knob. The agent entered, and Molly threw a displeased glance at him. Mind if we sit? Ramirez asked. I'll stand, Molly insisted. We are aware of the kidnapping and particulars, Molly, so your caution is appropriate. If you don't mind, I'll sit. Again, it won't take long. Peter and Ears grabbed chairs, and the agent sat at the edge of the convertible couch. You may not be accustomed to dealing with the FBI beyond your latest troubles. We understand what's happened in that regard, including the continuous threats to your property and related to your podcast. We've seen issues pick up as we added fans, but we expected that, Ears confided. Be prepared for direct talk from me. Short but sweet. I come from our HQ. As you might imagine, we're assessing risk factors associated with the after effects of the obelisk's discovery. I assume you're tied into the news, and you've witnessed the rise in social unrest. That's not totally obelisk-related, is it? Molly questioned. Some of this has to be from the evolving variant and non-variant conflicts that are occurring naturally. They are exacerbating and intertwined factors, Molly. We're dealing with a volatile combination of issues. Honestly, our federal resources are stretched thin, just like the local authorities. Stating it more succinctly, people are freaked and bad things happen when emotions are high. Bad things. Then why are you here? You spoke to your friends at the Cambridge PD. We know what they said to you because we told them what to say. What's new then? We took the information in, we understand, and we're moderating. Let's talk about that, and I'll give you some context. The country is in turmoil. It's not insurmountable, but not a cakewalk either. Then there are other countries not as stable, where insurmountable is far preferable than what they're experiencing. In other words, things are getting very, very ugly around the world. He paused for a moment and placed an index finger up to let him finish. This damn obelisk is destructive and destabilizing. People are feeling off-kilter, abandoned by their belief systems, their faith in a supreme being, or whatever glued them together socially. That's on top of the disarray caused by the media and other demons of democratic destruction during the last few years. Any of you ever play the old pinball machines? They all raised their hands. If you push the machine around too much, it tilts. When that happens, everything freezes and the game ends. And we don't want the game to end here. What we're asking, is that you help us keep the machine from rocking too much. Help us avoid the tilt. That's what I was getting to, officer, Molly explained. We agreed, right, Peter? She glared at him to finish the thought, since it was his podcast. You mean on mitigating some of this? Molly shook her head. Agent Ramirez, Peter began, we decided to mix it up, to avoid focusing exclusively on the obelisk and potential solutions. We're combining some of that with interviews in other areas of science and tech. Think more around the human interest components versus edgy tech talk. We're climbing fast in listener counts, so something is working right with our format change. Just a caution for you, then I'll leave you to your evening. We see what you're doing, that's our job. And we haven't bugged your condo ears, but we're watching where you go and what you do. If the local or national situation gets more out of hand, we may make a stronger plea for you to help us avoid stirring the pot. He stood up from the couch, and each of them followed his lead. In the last 4 weeks, you grew substantially from 4,000 active listeners, am I right? Ears confirmed, yes sir. It's quickly ramping to 20 million by the agency's last count. This is happening so fast that you don't understand the degree of clout you hold. Your voice has influence it never held previously, also across a much wider swath of society. Others are in contact with you? If you mean the news outlets and major media, we can't wrap our heads around those inquiries right now. What's worked thus far is to put our heads down and get the interviews done, Peter admitted. I've been watching the feeds more than these two, Ears grinned. We're being mentioned in many places, and there's a terrible picture of Peter in most of these feeds. But as Molly said, we're trying to be good journalists and expose what people are feeling. The agent nodded disapprovingly. With the radicalized mechs, the agency is not focusing on what they're feeling, but what they're doing and planning. And the new offshoots of other energized individuals with similar mindsets? Very unpredictable. Their social media sites glue them together. They establish corrupting loyalties and narratives and agendas, then they go execute on those agendas. With today's more disturbing variant factions, that makes for a very dangerous situation. Peter added, before you go, please be aware that we should be in concert with what you're requesting. Calming things. For example, we had a chipper named Jennifer in here today. I know, he imparted. Peter took a deep breath. There was no real discussion about the obelisk. We have others like her in queue as well, balancing out the messages and avoiding speculatives. Good. Best if we don't have to come back here, since our hands are full. We need help from you folks, who can influence the emotions of our citizens toward a more positive direction. I'm not talking propaganda, but you can help by limiting fear factor stories or speculative journalism. There are so many people who make a living these days at prostituting themselves to create clickbait narratives. They're either oblivious to or don't care about the larger societal impacts. That's almost always been true of the major social media outlets. But nowadays, multiply that bombastic crap by 10 million, and you have intractable, irreducible problems. Just try not to add fuel to that blaze, as it feels like the house is about to come down. Point taken, Molly confirmed as she followed him to the door. Appreciate the conversation. Oh, and relative to those copious new additions in your respective bank accounts. We took notice of that too, as you might have deduced. Be sure to give your favorite uncle his appropriate share, and you might need a good accountant to help on the tax implications. Molly closed the door and wiped her brow. Geez. I was afraid he'd shut the pod down. They couldn't do that. It's a First Amendment right, Peter insisted. Ears grinned. You guys need to cross over to the variant side. I consume 10 times what you do in terms of news feeds, though still less than what our chipper friend Jennifer does. I'm seeing media crackdowns in every country. The autocratic and religion-dominant countries are doing as you might expect. They're acting as if the obelisk never happened, despite their underground news providing the factual feeds. It's only in the democracies where the news remains open on the topic. I can't say people aren't alarmed globally, because they are, but one could deduce that what Stu said is believable. Meaning? Peter asked. Meaning that the entire obelisk story was created with the explicit intent to create havoc, fear, and uncertainty. Like Stu said, and I paraphrase, emotion is the tool to control the emotional. Add to that the advertising-fed media types and countless others who long for global anarchy and torment. Okay, Molly interjected, enough fear and loathing for one day, kiddos. Let's sit on this tonight. However, I'm not sensing the visit from our good-looking Latino agent should affect our strategy. We're mixing it up enough, in my opinion. Besides, he had no ring on his finger, and it's fine with me if he visits again, Molly joked. Molly, Peter stressed, when he shows up again, it'll be with cardboard boxes to confiscate our equipment, or with handcuffs to take us away. She smiled, raising her eyebrows. Agent Ramirez putting me in handcuffs? Kinky. Episode 17, The Bard. Early Wednesday morning, the team prepped for the Bard's interview in the car. Peter was worried about getting lost without their mapping apps. We're headed out of town to where? Not far from here. Get us to the turnpike first, then over to Waltham. He's in a hotel by Brandeis, Ears directed. Molly, your friends appear to be following us just fine. Do those guys ever eat? Yes, sometimes. And the two who were with us at Bioethel's interview shared that 100 thou with the rest of our class. Plus, I'm asking you two to pitch in a little to help them with expenses and such. Some of my kung fu brothers and sisters are even taking time off work to protect us. Great, Peter observed. You'd hope we had enough PD or FBI resources, but they're too stretched. We really appreciate your friends, and I assume they know that. After a short drive, they arrived in Waltham at a standard business class hotel. He's a nanotech professor from the West Coast, and remember to be sensitive about questions on his background, Ears warned. I'm sure he has tenure and might be concerned about jeopardizing his position. No problem, they replied. After phoning him from the lobby, the professor asked them to come up to his room. The Bard fit the classic professorial genre with a long beard and disheveled clothing, and it appeared as if he could tend to nothing beyond his work. They greeted him and introduced themselves. Obese chest breather. 20 breaths a minute, Molly surmised. I'm at 5 when excited. How unaware some people are. They sat around a small alcove in his room on the 5th floor, overlooking the campus. Beautiful this time of year, he began. Reminds me of the Pacific coast where trees are turning and fall is in the air. Seasons come and go for all things, don't they? Now let's discuss what we're covering. Peter was ready to explain, but the man held his hand forward to stop him. Wait. Meant to tell you. I listened to the podcasts from the last few weeks. Saw the news, and all that surrounds it is going viral. In a related sense, viral is what I plan to talk about today. Thanks, Peter replied. It's great you listened, in order to understand our format. We'll use this little Sony recorder, since we couldn't bring our usual studio setup, but it works just fine for quality. Let's get started, and we'll be appropriately sensitive to not expose who you are. Perfect. Peter commenced with his usual introduction. Today, we are interviewing a renowned scientist and researcher in nanotech and synthetic life tech. We'll get right to the topic on how these technologies might protect us from future threats, real or imagined. We agreed to call our guest William after the bard, our friend from 16th century England. That bard is credited with creating the phrase, "fight fire with fire." You'll understand the reference as we get through the interview. Peter paused, as he always did, to allow the intro sting to play. William first gave a short introduction. Do you care to add more? No. That's close enough. Fine then. Can you describe possible responses to the alien or obelisk threat within the larger nanotech and synthtech fields? Sure. But to be more specific, nanotech and synthtech or synbio were once separate areas of science with clear-cut distinctions. From those early days of this century, the two evolutionary paths have evolved and converged. Synbio is nanotech inherently. How could that happen? I mean, nanotech implies nano-sized robotics and is clearly focused at machines. Meanwhile, synbio is about synthetic life forms that might emulate or enhance biology. How do you bridge those two together? They bridged themselves. A few years back, we researchers agreed we were working on the same problems with nearly the same solutions. From that convergence, we've been able to advance the pace of progress. Can you provide more depth? The professor leaned forward in his chair, the topic animating him. Nanotech was and still is robotics, if you can call it that. The tech is comprised of tiny machines made of metals or chemical elements, tasked at a very small level to perform a function or functions. Synbio was initially only about synthetically created amino acids combined into the structure of DNA to super-enable or enhance life forms. This initially resulted in great discoveries, such as new wonder drugs and vaccines. In other words, both nanotech and synbio were tasked to perform these desired functions at the very small level. One solution was metallic and chemical, and the other was an extension of biological and bioelectrical. And does that distinction still exist? Peter wondered. Yes, in rare cases, but in other cases the various technologies have crossed over to resolve the same problems. In human systems, for example, synbio might be employed to rebuild a fractured bone. Similarly, a nanotech could be employed to repair the same bone. In both instances, they typically use elemental components in their environments to perform the same function. The goal was the same, the components were the same, so the two became one? Molly interjected. He laughed. Yes, a marriage of sorts. What one must realize at these molecular levels is that the type of machine required to perform the desired work is not what matters so much. It's achieving the end goal that matters. It's a classic case of the means not mattering because the ends are the same, to use my castrated English. You're the bard, Peter affirmed, which gives you the right to speak the language as you please. Our listeners should understand the analogy. Can you discuss how this technology may protect us? But please wait before you respond. Let me give a disclaimer to our audience. I want our listeners to understand that our intention in mentioning the obelisk is not to throw another log on that bonfire. Enough of those flames are being fanned by the major media outlets and lookalikes. We want our expert guests to provide perspectives on solutions to any future engagement that could occur with alien cultures, but not to foment additional concern or worry. And that's just the thing, Peter, the bard added. We don't know how imminent the threat might be. This object may have been floating in space for many billions of years. Could also be, it was pointed specifically at Earth by a dying race, and unpleasant aliens are only a short distance away. We're going through the Spanish flu stage of this discovery. Peter's forehead creased at the mention. Spanish flu. Yes. Any time humanity has faced an unknown, we suffered social unrest and duress, as in the case of the Spanish flu epidemic. Even the coronavirus epidemic, for that matter. This is expected, and we should have learned from these past cataclysms to calm down, plan, and execute appropriately and aggressively. As we grow to understand the nature of the obelisk and our own ability to respond to any threat, I hope we can get to that calming point. And how will nanotech and synbio help? Ears asked. Consider Ears, my new acquaintance here. Your own biology was changed at a molecular level to produce your augmentations. That was classic Edie combined with scrolling tech, correct? Ears nodded his head. Yes. I'll answer your question, Peter. First, however, I prefer to only use the term nanotech from this point, given the picture I painted. You must understand that nanotech may be in its 40th year, but it is still evolving at a frenzied pace, off the charts. Frenzied is not negative, not by any means. Indeed, as it relates to future threats, it's a clear positive. This is for what reason? Peter queried. Given its wide-ranging capabilities, nanotech must be the first choice for any viable Earth defense. Consider the obelisk and its glyphs. That we can decipher, one alien race invaded another, and some form of nanotech was weaponized. Most of your listeners are aware through media reports that our defense agencies hold nanotech weapons on the mark and just need the go signal. You must conclude that this is also true in many other advanced countries. Moreover, previous challenges for the effective dispersal of this tech into the biosphere have now been resolved by discoveries made the last decade with self-replicating, modal and mobile agents. Peter clarified. By this, I believe you mean agents that allow the tech to disseminate broadly or quickly across an environment. I think you're implying tiny legs or wings or airborne capabilities to ride the wind. You're also suggesting that these aliens may have attacked their enemies with this type of fire, and we should fight fire with fire? The bard banged his hand on the table, causing the Sony to rattle. My point entirely. Research labs around the globe have made significant progress using nanotech for positive purposes. Just like other technologies, it's also being used for defensive means, which I don't consider a negative. It's simply defense. Their potential use is very similar to nuclear weapons, and they provide one more very competent tool in the arsenals of these countries. I can't expose certain activities for obvious reasons, possibly even disconcerting ones, but most technologies like this are under watchful eyes. Let me rephrase, Peter insisted. We can fight alien nanotech with our own nanotech. But isn't it presumptuous to believe our tech could ever match theirs? You must assume that whatever they have in their quiver is many eons advanced from our own. I'm not saying it'll be easy, he replied. It's a new frontier of research and applied science that looks very promising based on the progress made thus far. Funding had been pouring into this research far before this obelisk event, and we've progressed rapidly. Indeed, we're so far along that the tech is approaching a functional brick wall, meaning that any alien visitors have also likely encountered that same wall. Part of that wall relates to how small we're going, Peter suggested. You mentioned amino acids, which are small things. Is it possible aliens are using nanotech at the subatomic level? No doubt they are, the Bard agreed, but we're there too, and we have been for some years. Right in our own backyard is the technology to enable the wide-scale use of nanotech weaponry, and we can disperse that weaponry as fast and furiously and broadly as required. However, at a certain point of very, very small tech, even at the quantum level, you hit a point of diminishing returns. It's likely these aliens hit that same point long ago, so our tech may not be as different as one might assume. Great information, Peter nodded, although it presents a quandary. If we were to release this nanotech weaponry as a defense, how does every person and everything else avoid dying when that happens? He laughed. Oh, sorry. I failed to mention the obvious. We'll need to inoculate the existing population with the proper protective mechanisms. This might occur at various levels: white blood cells, antibodies, subatomic. It's a reasonably foolproof mechanism and by no means secret. Publications are widely available online. I could point your listeners to some of this content if required. Peter was disturbed at the suggestion, but proceeded. Sure, we can place that in the show notes. We do need to wind it up, but your analogies to the Spanish flu and coronavirus are apropos. I assume it's this: we'll inoculate humans to counter or mitigate defensive agents released into the environment. That could include agents large or small, from a cellular, biological, or physical perspective. It's like an anti-missile missile, only you're inoculating against the known pathogens because we're the ones producing them. Then, assuming there was an invading alien force, every human or hybrid is immune, correct? To put it in influenza terms, the Bard replied, you create flu shots to meet every potential variation to the virus, irrespective of the variation. Given our definition of nanotech, this will cross biological or mechanical barriers. In other words, if an alien species arrives in robotic form, we have a formidable defense waiting. If it's biologic, we have a similar defense. Better yet, in both accounts our offense may even be superior, or at least give us a fighting chance to fight their fire with our fire. Make sense? Peter placed his hands atop his head, trying to grasp the complete meaning. Absolutely. We're talking substantial new funding, I assume. The world of research only moves forward with funding for sure, the Bard confirmed. Molly signaled to Peter. I wish we had more time, he admitted. They then thanked the Bard and ended the session. In the car on the way back into town, Ears volunteered his thoughts. After this last interview, I imagine you both are touched out. I clearly am, and I'm the one accustomed to multiple inputs. Don't forget, though, that the next interview is not so tech-oriented, at least from an alien obelisk perspective. It's Oort Cloud, and it'll be more grounded in today versus a few years away. The foreboding thing, Peter declared, is the immediacy of this tech. These experts aren't talking as if the weapon or defense is far off sometime. In fact, our Bard friend basically said that if it's not here today, it'll be here tomorrow, whether it's via our DoD funding or China's, or pick another country or trillionaire. I love tech, but aren't we dancing into deep weeds on the virulent potential of this frenzy he mentioned? My dear Peter, you are the worrier, and that's okay since somebody should be. But getting back to business, Molly suggested, we'll clean the Bard up and run it next Wednesday, a week from today. Omnibus plays today on our regular Wednesday 4 p.m. show, and Peter's sweetie Jessica streams on our Friday special. She smiled into the rear-view mirror. It's Jennifer, he insisted, shaking his head. Oh, of course, the lovely Jennifer. Now, Ears, when are we getting with our surgeon friend? This Oort Cloud reference still has me confused. He chuckled. Just consider comets and asteroids bouncing around in space and fracturing and recombining in various forms. All very broken and deformed. Yet solid, if that helps. Slightly. What day? He's a busy guy, and he plans to catch us at the hospital when on break. The dude is working 100-hour weeks. I guess that's pretty normal nowadays, at least for physicians who are treating the geedy community. Friday is his best guess, but it'll be on a minute's notice. Okay? Please try to firm this up the best you can, and thanks so much for doing the legwork. We love you, of course. You're the best and are uniquely valuable in this venture. Ears confided, as much as I love both of you, that cool million sitting in the bank account was a minor extra incentive, I must say. They laughed. Yeah, Peter admitted. That helped ease the burden and possibly even the threat. I wonder where our Texan podner is right now. Roping a calf. They still do that in Texas, you know. Ears was peering in the visor mirror. Don't turn around, either of you, but we're being followed. Not just by Molly's buds. I've been watching. These guys appear to be undercover with the sunglasses and all, but you can't tell these days. What do I do? Peter wondered. Just be cool. No change, Molly cautioned. We'll get pictures and track them, but nothing is likely trackable if it's the feds. These guys must have tailed us from the condo. We can only hope for the feds, Ears pointed out. I hate to think it's our radicalized mech friends. And Omnibiv plays in a few hours. That could amp up the intensity. Let's chill, she insisted. We need to go our way and keep vigilant. Too many cowardly creeps coming out of the woodwork, mech or otherwise. Violence is rising to a fever scream. They reached home after a few minutes. Peter turned into the condo's guarded gate driveway and glanced at Molly in the back seat. Good. They drove past us. Hey, you don't want to stop the presses on the podcast, do you? Ears questioned. No. No stopping. I forgot to mention to you both. My friends are now carrying, by the way, with full-body suits. That's in addition to their other weapons. Above board and everything, but the last recourse. Who'd have perceived it could ever get this serious? Peter lamented. I mean, a little gold obelisk. As obvious as it was in hindsight that something like this could happen, people were grossly unprepared for the impact. We're too presumptive as a species, Ears observed. Archaic beliefs about being the chosen ones in the universe. We are inherently narcissistic and small-minded. I could add non-strategic, callous, and other glowing adjectives. Molly smacked her lips. Yes, boys, that is in our nature. But don't forget that those archaic beliefs, if it's religion you're referencing, had a few pluses with the minuses. I do find it funny that at one time we assumed humans were at the top of the food chain. In an ironic twist of fate, we might just discover we're actually nearer the bottom. Episode 18, Ort Cloud. Ears received a call from the surgeon early Friday morning, and he asked to meet them at 10 a.m. With so many interviews cascaded together, the podcast team was unprepared with questions. We're winging this one again, Peter admitted while driving to the hospital, but I can handle it based on your conversation with him, Ears. Yes. He's a talker. The challenge will be to keep him on track. Omnibiv ran without too much heat from the hinterlands, right? Peter asked. Ears nodded. It depends on degree, I suppose. I can't judge how volatile things are when every breeze is a whirlwind. We may have broken 20 million on streams and downloads, but I don't appreciate the threats that ride along. The world is filled with crazies, a big boatload of scared, narrative-driven nutjobs with weapons. Molly observed. I assume you are still forwarding the worst of those to our PD friends? Yep. Good, and we're queued for having your girlfriend on today's 4 p.m. run, Peter. You guys keep teasing me about this gal, and now I'm finally convinced to make good on it. When I walked her out to her car, she asked me to give her another foot rub. And you didn't pick up on that? Are any male hormones flowing in your veins, big guy? Ears joked. You'll get no more direct hint from a woman than an invite for a massage, my boy. A woman could slap you in the face or wrap her legs around your waist with an offer, and you still wouldn't understand anything about her intentions or emotions. Yeah, I'm not so great with emotions. Born that way. But okay already, I'll do it. Just been busy. Molly hesitated, feeling like their chiding was getting excessive. We're not forcing you, Peter, only teasing. Peter nodded his head and searched for a parking space in the visitor's lot. No more garages for us folks. Everything occurs out in the open. They met the surgeon at an outdoor patio, just off a waiting room on the 9th floor of the hospital. Although fall had arrived, it was a warm day in Boston, and the patio faced to the south. Molly donned her sunglasses as they sat at a concrete table and bench. A large blue and white metal umbrella shaded them from the sun. After introductions, Peter started the interview. We're so glad you could make the time to sit with us. For our internal needs, we called you Oort Cloud. He shrugged. Oort Cloud as in solar system. Yes. Most people don't get the connection, Ears advised, and it's a stretch, but the reference is relevant. If you visited the Oort Cloud, you'd find every shape of asteroid and comet and space debris you could ever imagine. The doctor shook his head, then rearranged his white coat to expose his sewn-on name tag. I get that and agree with you, given the context. Can we use an easier name during this interview? Can you call me Bill, my first name? It doesn't matter if my colleagues recognize me, assuming they're even away from work for enough time to hear a podcast. No secrets here, since you can walk into any ER these days and get an immediate eyeful of what we experience constantly. Great, Peter replied, anxious to get the interview moving. Let's begin. We're visiting today with Bill, a Boston surgeon, who will discuss ramifications of the multitude of new GD technologies and related impacts on medicine and the human body. Bill, can you give us a view on how the new technologies and extensions, whether clipper, chipper, or gripper, are impacting what you and your colleagues are doing in healthcare and treatment? I'm pressed for time, so I'll start right in. I prefer to ramble for a few minutes before you ask more questions. Are you okay with that? Peter was always on high alert when an interviewee wanted to take charge, finding that some could easily veer off in tangential directions. But given the doctor's time constraints, he agreed to accommodate the request. Sure. Go ahead. In the early days of the last few decades, most tech creators willingly followed the relatively modest genetic and related controls from the NIH, FDA, CDC, AMA, and the many subspecialties. Name your 3-digit acronym. They were generally well aligned to ensure the right people were doing the right things under disciplined lab trials, with proper supervision and controls. It was working. Not perfectly, but working. He paused to take a breath, and they could tell he was building a head of steam. Yet there were many things the medical community couldn't control, by a long shot. As early as the late teens, budding genetic entrepreneurs were working in their garages to create GD kits for elementary school classes. Can you imagine that? Third graders playing with the DNA of microorganisms? Got it, Peter interjected. The doctor's observation was commonly known, and the mention seemed superfluous. And Geedy tech is so compelling. Who wouldn't want improved appendage functions or added brain capacity, or perhaps an enhanced liver after drowning the first one in alcohol? Maybe have a go with robotic leg muscles if you did construction work. Who wouldn't want to suspend or reverse aging, or integrate reversalogs and senolytics into their daily regimen? These discoveries and implementations were hailed as the miracle drugs, miracle cures, and sure as hell they were that and still are. He paused momentarily to pull out a handkerchief and wipe the sweat from his forehead. However, demand for this tech far outstripped our ability to adapt during the mid to late 20s. And now new crap is spewing from every possible source. No government bodies are big enough or resourced adequately to withstand the crush of demand for new products. In fact, those first to bend and break the modestly soft rules were the folks making the rules and laws. You know about this, of course. All the get-rich-quick medical miracle stories in the news, with every congressman and regulator having their hands in the till. That's back page at this juncture. News no longer. Peter wanted to clarify the purpose of the interview. And how's this affecting your job? I can't go there yet. You asked me to give you context, and I'm not quite finished. It was the unexpected, exploding demand that inundated the system. And it wasn't as if an interested and willing person requested only a single augmentation or modification. That one guy might want 10 or 20 simultaneous genetic changes, some big, some small. And if he had the cash, he could get that. Access to Geedy tech certainly wasn't equitably distributed for sure, Peter added. Thing is, it started out as legit tech with rigor and discipline about how it was made, distributed, and applied. But worse than we all could have imagined, meeting the market's needs for elective genetic modifications quickly devolved into devising code changes for any flippant purpose. Even more horrific, any damn backyard garage barbecue latex glove science maven could make the stuff. All it took was a little high school chemistry and $1,000 to create the next popular and enriching genetic upgrade. But the smaller gene editing entrepreneurs weren't the biggest problem at first, were they? By no means. I'll mention this without vilifying any specific countries, though we both know who they are. Most countries don't have our regulatory structures or our safeguards and protections. In fact, we clearly know these nations would never create or apply them anyway. Their only focus is superior tech, meaning superior human beings, since humans are certainly tech. Maybe their goal is to enhance their national defense capabilities or produce enhanced workers for commercial use. They'd be happy editing citizens to their specifications, similar to a factory chicken farm manufacturing superior meat. The side benefit to the few in power, as seen in umpteen media reports, was to proliferate untested, unworthy, unholy tech while lining the pockets of the wealthy, the politicians, and their lackeys. You're talking Geedy tech? Sure, but not all Geedy tech was crap. Your friend here, Ears, for instance. Hey bud, just by looking at you, I can tell you had the best tech there was at the time. He turned back to Peter. Problem is, most people never get that high-quality tech. Most are buying their stuff off the internet or in a back alley, then injecting or popping or rubbing it on. And voila! Within a few weeks or months, a malformed arm is growing out of their ass. Peter was reminded of his friend, Dirksen. Yeah. Seen too much of that. If you went back, say, 20 years ago, you might have predicted this. You could have anticipated that genetic tech would provide capabilities and features beyond the imagination. It'll allow you to experience a month-long orgasm, if that's your taste. You can enjoy the sweetness of honey nobody ever knew, or grow a new lobe of your brain to process math like a supercomputer. Back then, you could have predicted the rush, the fervor, the frenzied demand for this tech. But you could not have predicted the insane speed of adoption. I would have guessed 100 years to get to where we are today. Not 10 or 20 as actually happened. We could also say that about AI, social media influence, or metallics integration, Molly added. Sure, and don't even get me started on secondary influences. But back to the early days of adoption, which was only a few years ago. Who would have seen the degree to which other countries would influence what happened in our country? If China was producing vastly superior intellects in their children, do you believe a competitive executive in Silicon Valley would stand by and say, "Bully for them, but my kids won't get that"? Really? The black market tech flowing from other countries overwhelmed us. It was cocaine and drug cartels times 10 or 100. Of course, we understand that dynamic now, though it's too late to do anything about it. Certain lucky people won, and what you consume on the mass-produced news feeds are stories of those who've won. But others lost, many others. The leagues of unfortunates are relegated to backwater lives of misery and overfilled hospital wards. Combing back the small tuft of hair on his head, Peter was impatient. During the last decade, the media had reported all of what he mentioned, and the doctor's accounting of it lacked the first-hand excitement and emotion that he anticipated from the interview. Understood, Bill. Can we now move to how this impacts you in your profession? Okay, I'm finished with that tirade, I suppose. I'll recall what my grandmother used to say. It's a shitstorm in the middle of a hurricane. I'm not implying negatives about the medical profession's response to this calamity, by the way. The entire healthcare infrastructure is doing what it can to mitigate this burgeoning catastrophe. This hospital, for example, is filled with heroes who do their best to cure, fix, and correct. Just this hospital? No, every hospital. Shitstorm is a figurative word for what this off-target crap is doing to people's lives. Do you know what I do each day? How many people I see damaged by defective geedy tech? I don't want to pick on that tech exclusively, as the debacle cuts across every implementation and hybridization, clipper, chipper, and gripper mechs. Those same basement garage surgeon biologist, chemist geneticist capitalist innovators are doing their own chip and metal integrations into bodies. They often unintentionally use off-target crap like hastily developed pluripotent stem cells or their derivatives. Imagine what happens when you integrate a chip incorrectly into a nerve. I've had people come to emergency in such horrific pain, their mouths were frozen open and they could no longer scream like that famous painting. They noticed the doctor's eyes well up with tears. But this is no painting. It's a 12-year-old kid who got street tech from a back alley acquaintance who said it worked just fine. He grabs instructions off the internet and tries it himself. Then he dies after 2 days of horrific suffering from off-target salamander DNA that slowly turned his lungs to jelly. And all he wanted was a pair of gills on his neck to show off to his swim class buddies. Molly noticed her heart was beating rapidly. She had never known firsthand the suffering he described. How do they know when and where to find help? The doctor blinked his eyes, trying to hold back the tears. Some of them finally realize a physician can sometimes repair a little of the hell they're living in, or temporarily alleviate the pain. We had a 20-something male patient a few days ago who arrived after rubbing street tech crap onto his skin with a cotton swab. He yearned for larger feet like elves in the movies. So he bought what he understood was a bottle of the good stuff from Thailand, and it wasn't cheap. I watched as they wheeled him in on the gurney for pre-op. He had 3 small legs or stubs of different shapes protruding from his left shin bone. Nerves, mind you, physical nerve bundles, were radiating from the skin. Every wisp of air was like breaking a bone. Every minor bump was a car crash for him. In sad irony, this guy's feet were mangled beyond repair. The poor ortho surgeon who spent 10 hours working on him said he'd never seen it that bad before. But then, he and I and my colleagues repeat that every day now. Both Molly and Ears wiped tears from their eyes. But to answer your question more directly, Molly, I can't impart to you the suffering he went through. I can't easily say how many days or weeks the problem takes to present itself. This new tech, like rapid scroll, speeds normal physical growth processes so differently, depending on the individual. Either way, it ends up being that simple thing called embarrassment, for God's sake, that prevents people from getting help. They're afraid to admit they screwed their bodies forever in an innocent desire to differentiate themselves from others, or to ride the wave of the latest fad. Is that case you mentioned an exception, or are they all that bad? Peter wondered. I'm not saying that guy was typical, but every case we see these days is atypical. There is no typical off-target Geedy variant case. We try to counter it using legit Geedy with approved stem cell lines and gene drives and scroll, but you never know what you'll find when you mix the two. Might be better, might be worse. You end up performing good old surgery in many cases and do your best to improve the bad situations. Sorry if this is too much reality, but we see it in droves every day. Unfortunately, the hospital lines where they're queuing up get longer and longer. I love medicine, it's my life, but I wish somewhere along the way we'd slowed things down. It's the pace of change that's the killer. The pace. Peter knew he needed to close the show and let Bill go back to his world of human calamity. Well, Bill, that gives us much to consider, much to consider. As a final question, what do you recommend to anyone considering Geedy? It's the same as any other tech, I guess. A substantial burden rests on those who are less able to acquire quality genetic tech. The consequences, however, can be far, far more egregious. Sorry. My watch just buzzed and I need to run. Anything else? No. Again, thank you for your time today. Very enlightening and helpful to our audience. Bill thanked them and hurried back inside, while the trio sat for a minute. I feel bad, Ears confessed, or guilty for having come from a wealthy family. My parents intervened on me when I was younger and gung-ho, and had to use it. There was peer pressure to proceed without thinking, but they made sure I had the best tech. I see stories all the time and have Geedy friends who are damaged, but this really impacts you. No reason to feel bad, bud, Molly assured him. This is the way it's always been since we dropped from the trees. Some are luckier than others and get to procreate, while others get mauled by the lions. Odd, isn't it? Peter wondered. What? They both responded. Odd, we came out of trees 3 or 4 million years ago, and the tech that Omnibev suggested might put us back in them. Reminds me of that band from the 80s, Devo, I think, implying evolution. Are we evolving or devolving, or does it matter? You're getting very philosophical, Peter, she expressed, wanting to change subjects. Kids, 1 more down and how many to go? Ears counted on his fingers. 5 more. We're screaming through these, and might be done with interviews the week after next, assuming they get queued for play and replay. Holidays, here we come. Geez, I can't wait for our fun winter vacation at Peter's parents' house in Toledo. Peter smirked. You two are so persistent. End of Amygdala Hijack Part 2, The Warning.